Okay, so welcome everybody for this final conference of Biodiversity Plus for the research projects that have been funded under BiodivHealth School. This call was on biodiversity and its influence on animal, human, and plant health. So it's an online public event which will be from 9 to 1. My name is Sophie Germann. I'm based as a French funding organization at ANR. I was in charge of the call secretariat of this call, along with my colleagues from Poland, NCN, France, FRB, and Tajem, Turkey. And I'm now the Biodiversity Plus Operational Manager for Biodiversity Monitoring and Research. So this meeting, as you know, is recorded. And this recording and the slides will be shared on our website. So we expect around 100, at least there was 180 registered participants. So let's see if the number is increasing. Just to let you know, like the audience, it will be mostly coordinators and consortium members of the BiodivHealth funded projects. Also Biodiversity Plus partners, including funding organizations, representatives from the European Commission, representative of the advisory board and enlarged stakeholder board, and of course, scientists, experts, and policymakers interested in this topic. So the objective of this conference is to give you a flavor of what's going on within BiodivERsA, this school, and of course this topic. You will have the possibility to discover the major research results of the 10 research projects funded under this BiodivERsA call. So thanks to all these speakers. And to learn more on the developed products, video, policy briefs, to transfer knowledge and disseminate the results. And of course, we will have time to discuss on this important topic, which is biodiversity and health. So the agenda for today, there will be an introduction session with welcome words by Magnus, our Biodiversity Plus co-chair from European Commission, and a keynote speech by Hans Keune. And then there will be 3 sessions dedicated to the presentation of the funded projects, where we will have around 20 minutes per session to discuss about their results and any questions that you would like to raise. And then there will be this last part, which is fostering policy impact, which will present the just produced policy briefs. And there will be a round table afterwards. So I will hand over to my colleague Magnus Tannerfeldt from Formas, who is co-chair of Biodiversity Plus.
Thank you very much, Sophie, and good morning, everybody. I will give a very brief introduction of Biodiversity Plus, and then I'll speak more on the call itself as an overview. So if I can have the next slide, please. So Biodiversity Plus is the European Biodiversity Partnership, supporting excellent biodiversity research with an impact for policy and society. And we are a growing consortium of partners, from 83 partners and counting, from 41 countries. Next slide, please. And as you can see in the map on the next slide, sorry, there, yeah. Most of us are in Europe, North Africa, and we have South Africa. And we also have associated partners in Quebec, Brazil, Taiwan, and Ivory Coast. And the partners of Biodiversity Plus are national or regional, local partners, mostly ministries in charge of research funding organizations. And on the policy side, we have ministries in charge of the environment and environmental protection agencies, mostly. Next slide, please. And what we do is it covers a lot of work streams. We work very much on transnational biodiversity monitoring and harmonizing monitoring schemes. So we have a full work stream on that. We support transformative change, promote nature-based solutions, and the valuation of biodiversity in business. We have a very strong interface with policy and management and practice. We work, of course, to protect and restore biodiversity in a number of ways, and we work on the global impact of Europe and vice versa. But at the heart, or perhaps rather at the backbone of BiodiVERSA, is the support to research and innovation. That is where most of our funding goes. And what we do, if I can have the next click there, goes to research calls. We launch basically one call per year, and we have launched our fourth call this year, we aim to launch a total of 6 or maybe even 7 calls over the current BiodiVERSA Plus phase. For each call, the funding is in the order of 40 or even more, 40 million euros, and we fund 30 to 35 or even 36 projects per call. Next slide, please. And of course, we do not work alone in this. We live in a very complex and increasing landscape of networks, initiatives, European partnerships, etc. And we try to find the synergies and working together with these as relevant. Next slide, please. Now, turning to the BiodivHealth call, that started already back in 2018. The topic was identified even before that, as biodiversity underpins humans' physical, mental, and emotional health and provides medical resources. But for us, it was a fairly new and a challenging topic to study the nexus between biodiversity and health. In the call, we also included a new type of action supporting synthesis research projects, and I'll come back to that. It turned out to be a very timely call because of the pandemic, and that reminded us to better understand that we need to better understand the emergence of zoonosis and to develop science-driven policies in the field to move health strategies from reaction to more anticipation and proaction. And I'll come back to that as well. Next slide, please. So this was a call to support transnational research projects at the nexus of biodiversity and health and properly taking into account socio-ecological contexts. And as said, we funded or opened to fund 2 types of projects: classical collaborative research projects, large transnational projects producing new primary data to generate new knowledge, but also synthesis projects using existing data. Next slide, please. And here is a very brief overview of the results. We had 49 full proposals submitted. 10 of these were funded, and there was almost 12 million euros of funding provided to these 10 projects. 9 of them are classical research projects, and 1 is a synthesis research project. Next slide, please. Just as an overview of the types of environments, there was a predominance for terrestrial environments, both in the submitted proposals and in what was funded eventually. And there were some projects working on inland water and coastal and marine. Next slide. Okay. And looking at the distribution among countries, on the left you see the awarded budgets normalized by community size to some extent, and there you can see that Switzerland and Belgium had the largest parts there, but also together with Romania, Ireland, Poland, France, Germany, and Austria. And on the right you can see the interesting distribution of coordinators. They come primarily from Germany and France, and also Belgium. Next slide, please. And this and much more about the call you can read about in the call catalog, which is available online. And there you can also find descriptions of every project and a bit more about the statistics and results of the call as a whole. Next slide, please. And just to mention, last year we produced a video focusing on the coronaviruses with One Health perspective, and you will actually be able to see this video and hear more about this later today. Next slide, please. Last year we also had a webinar focused on strengthening collaboration with multilateral environmental agreements, including the Convention on Biological Diversity. And that entire webinar and the slides are also available online at the Biodiversity.eu website. Next slide, please. And we are also very proud to present the 3 policy briefs that just came out. And they build upon a number of, or almost all of the research projects funded under this call. So they focus on different topics, and you will also hear more about them later today. Next slide, please. And finally, I just want to say that this call was possible thanks to the fantastic BiodiverSA team, the call secretariat, which is based at ANR and FRB in France, NCN in Poland, and TAGEM in Turkey. Of course, the funding organizations providing all the money, including the European Commission, who also supports the program and the partnership continuously. A special thanks goes out to the evaluation committee and the chairs, and the fantastic and hard work that they put into the evaluation process, which resulted in the fantastic funded projects. And so we already now, we thank you all for participating in the call, in the projects, and here today. So with this, I say thank you all. And now that's the end of my presentation. As you will hear later today, 2 projects from the call were actually had additional funding from the European Commission for 1 year of additional activities focused on COVID because of the timing. And to give an introduction from the side of the European Commission, we are very pleased to have with us here today, Karin Zaunberger, who is a biologist who started her career in the European Parliament, then moved to the Commission working on research, and is now working in DG Environment with a focus on biodiversity, climate change nexus. And Karin has for many years participated in international negotiations on biodiversity and climate change in the CBD, UNFCCC, UNEA, and she has worked on several reports in relation to nature-based solutions and ecosystem-based approaches. And she was in fact a member of the EU's negotiation team for the resolution on nature-based solutions, which was adopted by the United Nations Environmental Assembly a couple of years back. And it is a special privilege to have Karin with us here today, because from DG Environment, she was an integral part of the co-creation and build-up of the BiodiverSA Plus that we have today. She has now moved to other duties as International Relations Officer within DG Environment, but I know that she remains a strong supporter of our partnership and its efforts for biodiversity in ecosystems. And with this, the floor is yours, Karin. Please.
Thank you, Magnus. Good morning, colleagues. First of all, thank you very much for inviting me to this conference. As you said, I've been connected to BiodiverSA in its beginnings, and I remain connected, even though not really visible, but it's truly a pleasure to see how things unfold, in particular now in this special area, biodiversity and health, which is so important, as health is kind of really an issue, I think, where we can unanimously say that is really something of great importance for everyone. Now, speaking about biodiversity and health, that's of course a very big field. We could actually start with the start of humanity or human, not even human civilization, we could say human and nature, human and nature and health has been connected ever since. And I mean, if we look at many indigenous and local peoples and communities, but not only, I mean, there's actually, it's quite prominent where the source from medicines and how actually nature contributes to our mental and our physical health. So it has been always there. It's just maybe sometimes the modern civilization has been forgotten that where is the source for our health. And one could also start in, I mean, more recent times, several 100 years ago, 200 years ago, where the German listeners in this call might know Pfarrer Kneipp, who was called the water doctor. He also was very into that nature actually provides all the things we need for a healthy life. But as time is really too short, otherwise I would use the whole time of all the conference. So I will actually start my little introduction 10 years ago. Next slide, please. Where kind of it really enters the sphere of what we call international negotiation. That was when UNEP, CBD, WHO, and the World Health WHO and yes, UNEP, CBD, WHO put together a knowledge review on connecting global priorities on biodiversity and human health. And actually, since then, in the frame of the CBD, you have consecutive CBD COP decision on biodiversity and health. And I mean, this report actually really made it very clear that we need healthy ecosystems to provide clean air, fresh water, medicines, food security, and not only so the direct impact on our health, but also indirect, because they limit disease and also stabilize climate. And by stabilizing climate, they also help to keep our health. And so the report really brings these interlinkages between biodiversity, ecosystem stability, epidemic infectious diseases, and really brings it for the first time all together. It was very important to have this collaboration between CBD and WHO. Next slide, please. Then kind of another, call it sad highlight, but I mean, in the beginning, when the pandemic started, in the first month after, there was a manifesto of the WHO for a healthy recovery from COVID-19. As we all know, it took much, much longer than, I mean, 2020, we had still a couple of years to go. But I thought it was very telling that in this manifesto in May 2020, when they put up prescriptions for a healthy and green recovery from COVID-19, the protection and preservation of nature as a source of human health was the first action. So let's see, 4 years ago, this was really up at the very top of all our agendas, probably mainly because collectively we were very afraid, but it meant we had a very clear vision on how important the nature is for our health. Next, please. Since then, I mean, we had vaccines, we have fortunately left the pandemic behind us, a bit sadly, and that's a personal parenthesis. It seems that many of our really excellent resolutions while we were in the pandemic seem to have been forgotten if you look at the situation now, but that's the topic for another conference. But at least during the last conference of the parties of the CBD, just a couple of weeks ago in Cali, COP16, we managed to parties adopted the Global Action Plan on Biodiversity and Health that also finalized the work. I think it's gone on 5 or even 6 years. And I think now, of course, it will be, I mean, so crucial to now, of course, implement this action plan, because the plan is a plan, but if you don't do anything with it, then, a plan just remains a plan. What does it do? It's a voluntary plan. Yeah, okay. All the CBD is not legally binding. It's based on science, IPBES, IPCC, but also on a study on indigenous determinants on health for the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda. It also draws on the lesson from the coronavirus, and it recognizes, so it's very fundamental, and it's such as it recognizes, again, the link I've already mentioned, recognize it again. It also specifies that the unsustainable land use change in practices and habitat fragmentation are really a driver also for the emergence of disease. So in other words, if we manage to have sustainable land use and we have we counter habitat fragmentation, then we actually can help to diminish the disease emergence. And it also points to the importance of ensuring the fair and equitable benefit sharing of genetic resources and digital sequence information. That's very important for having more equitable health systems, because I mean the inequity is also a very big a very reason why, I mean, very reason for the health impact. And then finally, it's also when we see that biodiversity loss and its drivers are the threat to animal, human, and plant health. And I understand that probably the next presentation will go a lot more into this, so I will stop here. What I want to say, I mean, with all this in mind, that having this global action plan on biodiversity and health adopted just a couple of weeks ago, now actually the results from your research projects come in super timely, because I think this will be really important knowledge in order to now fully implement this global action plan on biodiversity and health. And with this, I stop, and I'm really looking forward to hear to the outcomes of the projects. Thank you again very much for having me here.
Thank you so much, Karin, and thank you for really showing the urgency of these issues. And we'll come back to a bit of discussion after the next speaker. So thank you, Karin, and I am very pleased to be able to welcome Dr. Hans Keune from Belgium to give a keynote speech. And Hans Keune is a political scientist and also a PhD in environmental sciences, I've learned. He works on One Health, eco-health issues with complexity challenges, integrated system approaches, science policy practice interfaces, and biodiversity and health. He was for several years at the Center of Expertise for Environmental and Health, and later joined INBO in Belgium and working for the Belgian Biodiversity Platform on the relationship between biodiversity and health specifically. Hans is currently based at the University of Antwerp as chair of Care and the Natural Living Environment, focusing on the relation between primary health care and the natural environment. And you are also affiliated to the Faculty of Applied Economics, working on decision support systems. On top of all of this, Hans also works with the Global Health Institute on One Health issues. He's an expert of the Belgian Superior Health Council and a lead author on the IPBES Nexus assessment, the nexus of biodiversity, water, food, and health. I hope we will hear a little bit about that today, perhaps. Thank you very much for joining us, and we look forward to hearing your thoughts. The floor is yours. Please.
Thank you very much for the kind words and the long introduction. It makes me realize a lot has happened over the past years. I try to share my screen now so I can start my presentation. So thanks again for inviting me. I want to do this presentation also a little bit interactive, to see it also a little bit as a warming up, one healthy warming up for this long day full of very important project outcomes and interlinkages between the projects. So I will invite you now to join me in discovering a little bit how you think about One Health. And I do this by taking us back into the old days where this television show was looking into different personalities presenting themselves as whatever type of personality. In this case, we talk about One Health. So my first question to you is to give me your view on these three different depictions of One Health. So this is also to illustrate that One Health is actually understood or depicted or framed in many different ways over the decades that have been passing since the first steps in this one medicine, one health type of framework developments got started. So I'm very curious to see how you see your favorite depiction on One Health. And you can do this by going to menti.com and use the code in the top part of the slide. And I look forward to your views, your votes on these three depictions of One Health. It's already a first. It's a bit like the Eurovision context, maybe, but now on One Health. Strikingly, the right one, which is maybe the most integrated and maybe most modern one, is clearly being favored by the group. And the center one is maybe a bit more old-fashioned, but it can still be, important to some communities. Okay, that's very interesting. So there's at least some diversity. That's already interesting to notice. Thank you very much for your contributions. Then the second question related to what is One Health is related to these three pictures. I will enlarge them a little bit to give a bit more introduction so you can see what are the options. The first one is from Fauci. Well known also from the COVID pandemic, battling a lot with Trump on COVID issues. But even before COVID, this was one of his quotes in CBS News. Nature is potentially the worst bioterrorist. So that's a kind of a warlike view on our relationship, our health relationship with nature. So that's one option. The other option I would like to present to you is what is sometimes called structural One Health, where actually nature is not seen as a source of zoonotic infectious disease risks and of a big threat by us, but the potential health risks are mainly driven by our own societal way of living. So how we organize our environment, our economy, global trade, global travel, etc. So that's more a societal view on One Health. And then finally, a view on One Health that's a bit more in the direction of ecosystem services. So what can nature do for us? And in relation to infectious disease risks, the well-known dilution effects is also being mentioned here. So again, I'm inviting you to share with us your thoughts and your ideas on what kind of depiction you most appreciate. Okay. Fauci is clearly not popular yet. Oh, there's one fan already. So the ecosystem services idea is leading here. It's close to nature-based solutions, of course. That's in the same field or perspective, you might say. But also the structural One Health idea is also getting some support. So that's interesting to see. Okay, thank you very much. So this was like a warming up for you to get into One Health and all the challenges of One Health and all the different viewpoints and then frameworks that are out there. A couple of years back, building on the international work and international linkages, collaborations with some colleagues, we made an overview of One Health challenges that I would like to briefly share with you. I will not go into all the detail, but just to mention that, and of course, I look forward to the outcomes of all the projects in the extent to which they are addressing or complementary address these challenges. So, of course, first, the practical implementation of One Health is still, as far as I see it, a big challenge. So there's a lot of conceptual work, international declaration work, scientific work, but the practical implementation is still a challenge. This also, of course, has to do with how you frame initiatives on the ground. Sometimes good initiatives are not labeled as One Health, but this is still quite a challenge. The integration of animal, human, plant and ecosystem health, which is the core of the definition of One Health, is still a challenge, I think. Often it's tackled in segments, but the full integration is still a big challenge. And also to have an integrated view on both the nature-related health risks, so the infectious disease stuff, etc., but also the benefits. For example, we work in Belgium on nature on prescription by general practitioners, which is more focusing on the nature-related health benefits. And often these two elements are seen in isolation, and also the experts working on these issues are still in different communities. So there's still integration work to be done there. Then finally, like we just discussed a little bit, the integration of structural societal One Health drivers, like the economy, travel, trade, etc., are also still in need of a lot of attention in many of the One Health related work. And then below, I will not go into the details, but some integration and inclusivity, but also adaptivity and anticipation challenges, and of course, which is highly important, I think, in the field of One Health, transdisciplinarity. So not only the integration of different scientific disciplines, but also collaboration in the research with non-academic people from the ground is hugely important in the case of One Health in order to tackle complexity, and also in order to take into account the different normative perspectives that are out there. In the same book in which we published that One Health chapter, we also had a chapter about defining nature. I think there's still a lot of challenge there in how to make this debate constructive. We clearly, in this chapter, we brought together a lot of people with very diverse backgrounds and a lot of experience and knowledge about nature. And in the end, we came to the conclusion that objectifying what One Health is not only very difficult, but it's also a definitional attitude that may marginalize or disregard the existing plurality and also relevance of values and worldviews connected to different definitions of nature. So I think that's important in general to take into account for nature, but also relates to One Health. Of course, when we deal with all these important One Health challenges, networking, getting personal relations between people working in the field on One Health, and also trying to do capacity building, etc., is hugely important. This is an example in which I happily involved for quite some years myself. That's a European network for eco-health and One Health, where we published a handbook for the evaluation of One Health, which is freely available online, and also a recent publication about the core One Health competences we see when trying to deal with One Health challenges, and that includes not only skills, knowledge, and awareness, which are more relatively well known, but also attitude aspects. So how do you work together? How do you open yourself to other views? How to do collaborative transdisciplinary research? So these kind of elements are also addressed there. And also importantly, I think the work in the same network, NEO, about knowledge integration. This on the left side, you see a framework that was developed with a big group of authors on how to evaluate or assess the quality of knowledge integration challenges. And I think many of the elements are still quite useful for many of the international projects, for example, working on One Health challenges. And then on the right, that's an announcement. It's not published yet, but it's almost getting published. A new book by the network, which is mainly addressing, it's introducing One Health to students, but also experts that are still not knowledgeable about One Health. So that gives a nice overview also historically, but also addressing many important aspects, including, for example, the role of biodiversity in One Health. But also we focus on the 9 core competences related to One Health that were tackled in the publication in the previous slide. So that's an announcement. So you're most happy to connect to us for getting more information about the book once published. Of course, connecting, producing good knowledge is very important, but to connect it to policy practice is also hugely important. I think many of you are aware of IPBES, the IPCC for Nature, and I see several participants in the room are actually also being part of the current assessment, which is on the nexus. And I think this is for the first time where health actually gets a prominent, equal place in the assessment next to other aspects like biodiversity, climate change, but also water and the food sector. But I think this is the first time where the potential of One Health is appreciated and is actually having its own chapter. Now, of course, these are the rules. This still has to be decided upon in the final wording on the important part of the assessment report, which is the summary for policymakers. So in December, the IPBES member states will come together to discuss with the experts about these findings, and some final fine-tuning still will have to take place. So I'm not allowed to give you any view on the results, but just to give you a peek, I hope IPBES will not get mad for me doing this. But in our chapter on the health angle on biodiversity and the interlinkages within the nexus, we also worked with an artist, Lina Kusait, who made a depiction of One Health, which you can secretly see a little bit here. And we also printed some t-shirts in the Nepal author meeting. So this is already a teaser. What we try to do in the BioNext project, and that will be my final part of the presentation, is also supporting the work of the Nexus assessment work within IPBES, where we broaden the Nexus perspective a little bit with sectors like energy and transport that were excluded in the IPBES Nexus assessment. In the scoping of the assessment. So the governments decided these issues to be either less important or a bit too sensitive politically or economically. But in this project, we try to tackle these, and also we try to focus on the different perspective on nature that are part of the Nature Futures framework that's also being tackled within IPBES. And yeah, on the latter, the Nature Futures framework, we also collaborated with our favorite artist, Line Cousait, and here you can see different, pictures of the different views on how humans can live together with nature. So this is also to inspire you a little bit from the artistic point of view. And then finally, we also try to work within BioNext, where we have a lot of modeling activities also going on. We try to work with model experts that normally don't really take into account health a lot, so they are beginners in the field. And we try to build bridges between those modelers and One Health experts. Some are also here in the room. I saw. We had a fantastic bridge building workshop quite recently in Athens, where we are trying to get together in understanding each other, but we also are doing a Delphi consultation to get all the elements that could be of importance for One Health modeling in relation to the nexus. So this is ongoing work. I don't have results, but you can see that on the right side that one of the modelers is already getting a headache of all the fantastic inspiration of One Health, but also the complexity of One Health, which was a bit unexpected for the modelers in that work. So by this, I'd like to thank you a lot for your attention. Closing again with our favorite artist, Line Cousait, working a lot on nature-health linkages also. And I look forward to any questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Hans. And with this, it's time for a bit of discussion and questions. And for that, I leave the word to my colleague, co-chair, Rainer Sotke, please.
Thank you, Magnus. And thank you to all the speakers, especially Hans, for your very interesting keynote speech, and also the other two speakers for the introductory speeches, Karin and Magnus. As Magnus already introduced, my name is Rainer Sotke. I'm the second co-chair of BiodiversityPlus Plus. I'm based at DLR, Project Management Agency in Germany, in Bonn. And yes, I'm happy to moderate the discussion we have now. We have around 15 minutes for discussion and questions according to these talks we just heard. And yes, I'm happy to take any questions. And I think you can raise your hand or ask questions in the chat.
To give you like technical details, as it's a webinar, the panelists can raise their hands, but for the other attendees, you need to raise your question in the Q&A session, function, sorry, and we can give you the floor.
Okay, and I see a question in the Q&A session. So from Regine Fraisse, could you tell us a little bit more on the ongoing research in the University of Antwerp? So this is to Hans on the nature-related health benefits. Maybe Hans, you might.
Yes. Where to start and when to stop, but we do a lot of different type of research activities. stretching from international research projects like EU projects, but also very local practice-oriented projects. And the latter, I think, is maybe most interesting to share with you. So we work together with general practitioners, for example, but also psychologists and people from psychiatric and other healthcare type of institutions in a community of practice to share experiences, but also the challenges of nature on prescription, which seems quite straightforward. Doctor says go out, have a walk in the park and feel better. But once you dive into it, and especially in the healthcare sector, things are, of course, very critically addressing the evidence-based medicine perspective for good reasons. So there are many challenges, also practical challenges, how to deal with people who don't live near nature. There's a lot of inequalities, like Karin also already mentioned, in how people live. And also we try to work on tools that support the dialogue between nature professionals and healthcare professionals, but also with patients and the family of patients, for example, in designing green surroundings of healthcare institutions in a more biodiverse, but also in a more therapeutic sense. So how to combine all these challenges and to have everybody happily doing this, and to do this also in a sustainable, structural manner. So that's part of the work that I would like to highlight. Thank you.
Thank you, Hans, for these explanations. I see a hand from Karl. Please, Karl.
Thank you very much, Hans. So sometimes I think we're totally surprised that words that we thought that we understand, like nature, are not so clear to everybody, and people have a very different understanding of nature. And in front and facing all these changes in the environment, obviously we need maybe a better understanding of nature, but also a better understanding of the understandings of nature as well, because we may use this word and people understand very different things. Now we have the chance also seeing at 30 by 30 and just looking 5 years in front, we have to do something in the European landscapes that is supporting nature, but we don't really know what. So still, there is no real concept about implementing the EU biodiversity strategy. And I think we should bring nature to the people and not people to the nature only. So we have to integrate and nature into our thinking in all fields of society, and also having protected areas, for instance, in settlements. And like in Belgium, you can hardly have 30% of Belgium as natural landscapes in the meaning of the word non-human. So we have to include humans, obviously, into the concept of nature much more than seeing nature and humans separately. And I think this discussion, as fundamental as it is very important in this very moment.
Thank you, Karl. I see no further questions in the Q&A chat, so I want to invite you to all the participants which are not giving a talk today to put their questions in a Q&A section. There's a button below and you can put your questions there. But I see another hand raised. Magnus, please go on.
Yes, thank you. I want to take the opportunity here to ask you, Hans, if now that you, this issue has come a long way in, I guess, in the last few years or decades, and the landscape of on the research side, on the policy side, is very, there is a lot going on One Health perspectives and so on, especially, of course, triggered by the COVID pandemic, which at least raised awareness, whether that is a long-lasting awareness or not. I don't know, but people know and realize that nature and health are connected in some ways. And there are many organizations working on this. There is funding, perhaps more available now. But given that we as a funders here, a lot of people in this audience, and you have the European Commission as well, what would you say are the big challenges looking forward that are not properly addressed at the moment, or where you would see that there is more funding needed for the research or more science to policy interactions? Looking forward and looking at what is not being addressed properly at the time. Thanks.
Yeah, that's maybe a question easy to ask, but not easy to answer, of course. It's a, it's a big topic. Also, I talked, this is an anecdote, already quite some years ago, I had a walk together with Terry Hartig, one of the first experts really working on nature health linkage, mainly in relation to health benefits, mental health benefits of nature contact. And he said, I cannot follow my own field anymore. It's exploding with papers and publications. So it's very difficult, I think, to have a complete overview, but the processes like IPBES, for example, are quite well organized in that relation. And I cannot give any outcomes yet of IPBES, but take IPBES as a stepping stone would be a first advice, because there also we try to tackle knowledge gaps, which are of course very useful, and they are building on exactly the challenge that we had in IPBES, not only to look at the state of knowledge, but also to relate it, and that's called in IPBES response options to practical solutions. So what can governments do? What can local actors do? So that combination with knowledge gaps being listed, with a state of the art of knowledge collected and a lot of experts would be a good stepping stone. So I don't have an easy answer here, but for the rest, I think transdisciplinary, more integrative research, dealing with complexity, how to make choices in practice, even if things are complex and never perfectly understood. Things like that are also quite important. And I think we need some new methodologies there, and also openness from funders to new methodologies, mixed methods, etc. So step out a little bit of the traditional methodological toolbox. That would also be my advice. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So systems analysis and integration. Yes. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hans, for this question. And maybe another question from myself, which is directly connected to that. So research at the interface between biodiversity, health, and additional aspects, environmental aspects, are usually not so easy to cover by funding organizations, which are sometimes specialized. So maybe Magnus, what do you see for research funding possibilities here on biodiversity and health, and what are our own aims within BiodivERsA to cover these aspects in the future?
Easy question, difficult to answer. I think looking at, we have to be guided by the science. We have to be guided by, as Hans says, the IPBES assessments in where should we go with the funding. It's not for the funders to decide what are the pressing issues. It is for the researchers to tell us what the questions are, going from the very basic blue sky side all the way to very applied research, of course. And then from the policy side, for the politicians, for decision makers at all levels in society, regional, national, European and global, to say what kind of issues are they struggling with, where do they want facts, research to help them make those decisions. So that is actually the answer I would give at this point, because it is it is an ever-growing or changing landscape, of course, and every country has their own priorities. So for Biodiversity Plus, we need to. It'll always be perhaps a compromise or a least common denominator that we would go for, where we can attract also a lot of funders and partners to join around certain topics or issues to be addressed. And that
Thank you, Matt.
Yeah.
Thank you, Magnus. Now I see several questions. Maybe a short question. Has there been research done on One Health in Africa and funding opportunities for Africa? So twofold question. Maybe the first part of this question to Hans. What research has been done on One Health in Africa?
Yeah, I'm not an expert on Africa. I could invite Herwig Leirs, my colleague from University of Antwerp, maybe to give his view, because he's much more having experience in that field. But I know, for example, there's a quite vivid One Health community of experts in Africa, and I think a lot of field work research is being done in Africa. But I don't know if Herwig is available to shed some light. So I think he's better placed to give some insight on that. Herwig, please.
Yes, I think what you said is correct. There is quite a vivid community of people studying One Health, and because people live very closely to nature in the rural parts of Africa, there certainly is this interest, an interest which is very much focused, I must say, on the emerging infections, much more than other aspects of the relation between biodiversity and health. Although things like ecosystems services also have interest, but a lot of the work, at least in the kind of environment that I'm working in, is focusing on these emerging infections or zoonotic infections, but there's very clearly a One Health aspect to that.
Yeah, if I may add a small note to also show that there's also work on nature-related health benefits going on in our chapter in the IPES Nexus assessment, the health chapter. We also, in the early stages, unfortunately, he had to drop out because he was too busy. A psychiatrist from Africa is actually working on green space and health in urban areas in Africa, where we see the same kind of dynamics as we have in Western Europe. So also people lacking contact with nature, unhealthy environments in general. So that kind of work is also going on in Africa. Thank you.
Thank you, Hans. BiodiversityPlus also has the opportunity for research funding within countries outside Europe. So there are from time to time also funding projects funded which do research in Africa. So also in this call, I think, and I see Thomas, you raised your hand for just a long time, so I want to give the word to you, please.
Well, thank you very much. I don't want to take too much time. Just briefly and very specifically ask, I know that the JPI AMR, so antimicrobial resistance, where One Health, there's quite a important topic as well, although dominated there. I have the feeling that One Health is mostly understood by human and animal health. So if veterinarians and clinicians work together, that's One Health already. And this is a bit exaggerating. But what I wanted to ask from this background is, as far as I understand, the JPI AMR will not be existing anymore as a funding tool. It will be renamed and it will be somehow be called One Health. And I was wondering if Biodiversity is involved there or could be involved there to underline the environmental importance in this context.
Thank you, Thomas. Magnus, do you want to answer this one?
Sorry, I was multitasking with questions that were online. Sorry for that. Could you please repeat the question?
So very briefly, JPI AMR will apparently not exist anymore. There will be a One Health tool to fund projects in that context. And I was wondering if Biodiversity is involved there or could involve itself there to strengthen the environmental part in this One Health, because it is very often dominated by clinical and veterinary questions.
Yes, that's an interesting question. I was not aware. I thought AMR would be continuing, but that could be something for sure we could discuss. It's always difficult when we move into areas that are already taken care of by other groups, and we have to make sure that we don't spread too thin. But there will always be there has to be overlap so that we don't create silos. And whenever there are topics where we feel that biodiversity and ecosystems have to come into the play and be highlighted and stressed, we will be happy to do so. And that happens, in the urban areas and many others. Also in agroecology and forestry, interestingly enough, sometimes biodiversity is not so at the forefront of things. So yes, that's a good point. Thanks.
Brilliant. Thank you. I see a question that the BiodivHealth call, as well as the CBD Global Action Plan on Biodiversity and Health, are both focusing on human and ecosystem health, but not on comprehensively on domestic and wild animal health. And if we see an added value of such projects focusing on the same time on some pillars of the One Health approach. So maybe I want to pass this question to Karin, actually. So do you see possibilities to address these questions to the policy sector, especially to the CBD?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the question. Actually, at least in my understanding, even though it's might be not so specifically mentioned, but I mean, it very well covers also health. I mean, the Global Action Plan on Biodiversity and Health also covers animal health and health of wild species. I think that is the idea. It's not ecosystem health. I mean, ecosystem health also implies the health of its ingredients, so to speak, meaning the species health, meaning the domesticated ones and the non. I mean, I remember in the negotiations itself, there was sometimes always this thing where we end up having a long list and then in the end saying, no, the ecosystem, it really covers it all. So I think it should, the Global Action Plan on Biodiversity and Health should really be considered as inclusive. I mean, biodiversity in all its three dimensions, genetic, species, and ecosystem, and under species, I mean, you have wild and domestic ones. So, I mean, in short, the answer would be yes. I mean, it's definitely, I would, in my understanding, this would definitely be part of it. I hope this helps.
Thank you. Thank you, Karin. I see time is running already. So if there...
I think we can move on to the next session.
Then I suggest you move on to the presentations of the projects, and I pass over to you, Sophie, again.
There are still some questions to be answered, but I think we need to move on. I invite the panelists, in case they think that they can answer to these questions, to write them down. And then we will move on to the first session of the presentation of the funded projects. So there will be 3 sessions. Each speaker will be invited to talk for 5 minutes. So it's a bit limited, but I invite you to stick to the time. And then there will be, again, per session, there will be 20 minutes of discussion. So there is still some time to discuss. So for this first session, I will invite first Thomas and then Karl and Michael to join me to speak, and I will share again my screen. So thanks to the speakers of the welcome introduction session. So I now hand over to Thomas for his talk.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Thanks for inviting me here, and I will try to be in time, so I'm not at the first already extending. So our project was focusing on the microbiology, and here we asked the question if biodiversity can act as an ecological barrier to the spread of clinically relevant antibiotic resistance in the environment. So as you saw, we were quite a large consortium, and I just briefly want to introduce why AMR is important. There was an article which I think described it quite well, because it called it the silent pandemic. Silent pandemic because you can be colonized by an antibiotic-resistant bacteria and you will still be healthy and you will not notice it. But you will run into problems as soon as you get ill and the doctor tries to treat you with antibiotics, and then you are colonized by the resistant bacteria, which may transfer their resistance to pathogens in your gut, for example. And as you see here on the left-hand side, this is expected to increase dramatically. Now there's a strong environmental aspect of AMR, which is on the right-hand side illustrated. It was a large consortium project where we also were participating, where you see that we more or less in our sewage have everywhere releasing AMR. Bigger problems we have in South America and Africa, but also in the countries which have a higher BIP, you see that we do release quite a lot of different combinations of AMR. Now this is empty on my scale. Okay. Our hypothesis, therefore, was if diversity can serve as a barrier, microbial diversity in this case, that is, can serve as a barrier to the invasion of antibiotic-resistant bacteria and their transferable antibiotic resistance genes. And therefore, we analyzed if diverse environmental communities contain less resistance genes than less diverse communities. For that, we analyzed pristine soil and river environmental samples across Europe. Pristine means less impacted or less disturbed. So pristine is a bit of an exaggeration. And as I said, we analyzed aquatic ecosystems and soil ecosystems and analyzed the 16S DNA to get an indication of the microbial diversity, and then used, with the help of resistomap, an analysis of a large amount of resistance genes. Overall, we had 200 samples. We did this in a replicated manner. So we, in each of the participating countries, we analyzed forests and aquatic, or soil and aquatic systems. And this is the main result, which we have also already published. And here you see 2 graphs. On the top is the river and on the bottom is the soil. And one surprise for us was that we didn't see an effect in the river, but we saw a clear effect in soil. So if you see with a look at the lower panels, with an increasing diversity, we have a decrease of number of resistance genes. So there, this hypothesis could be supported for soil. If we have a higher diversity, we see a lower number of resistant genes present. I know. And this has, of course, already implications, for example, in the context of water reuse, which is currently discussed a lot. And there we try to apply these results already in terms of having a more healthy soil, and if that can be better used in the context of water reuse when you use treated wastewater for irrigation. And with that, I should be in time, and really want to say a big thank you to our ANTIVERSA team. It was a great pleasure to work in this team, and I hope we can continue this in some other manner. I'm sure that's true for many other projects as well. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Thomas. Thank you to be on time also. So the time for questions will be after these 4 presentations. So keep your questions for later, or you can already put them in writing, and we will address them at the end. So thanks a lot, Thomas, and let's move to Karl for the DiMoC project.
Thank you for having the opportunity to share some findings of our project. So in our project, it's basically it focused on biodiversity and ecological processes to better understand the emerging risks that are related to viral pathogens mostly. And we, next slide, please. We studied different groups of organisms like mammals, birds, mosquitoes, which were in the focus, but also beetles and different viruses. And the research questions were first focused on interspecific interactions within the ecosystems, such as competition or predator-prey relations. Then we asked about the dilution effect, but you could also say that the concentration effect when you're losing biodiversity, whether that results in a greater risk for transmission. We also studied insect virus diversity, which is, of course, linked with transmission risks and climatic conditions at different scales. So we worked at local scales, regional scales, continental, but also at global scales with different kinds of methods. So, and finally, we were also interested to more or less trace and quantify uncertainty in these processes. Next slide, please. So we worked with experiments, but also observational studies. We did modeling, like joint species distribution modeling, and we studied not only the drivers, but also the processes that are going on then. We studied the literature, we did reviews, we also did fieldwork, and of course all that cannot be condensed within 5 minutes, but it couldn't also hardly be condensed within 3 years, because we had such a diversity not only of organisms and ecosystems that we were looking at, but also at different methods. So we did also laboratory studies at Berendonk Institute, for instance, on vector competence for different viruses and different mosquitoes. And finally, we also studied global patterns to identify gaps in knowledge about all these processes. So where were studies done, and also where we have no knowledge about what's going on until now, because there is no local studies. We also did species distribution models for all mosquito species within Europe. That's not yet published, but will be published soon. Next slide, please. So we did describing and monitoring of finding even new records for mosquitoes, like in Yucatan Island in Mexico. We did natural field infections and laboratory experiments showing that Culex species can be naturally infected and transmit 4 flaviviruses. So, like, also investigating the host choice of viruses and insects, and there we find for one group, for one genus, no big preference, like for the Culex species. And then for other genera, we find quite different patterns. So there is a difference in the groups of organisms, even within mosquitoes, that needs to be considered. We also did experiments about how predators can control, like water beetles in water bodies could control Aedes albopictus as one of the main invasive species in Europe that is transmitting pathogens to humans. And finally, we did a series of modeling activities, very different kinds of models, so process-based models, correlative models, trans-species distribution models. And in these modelings, we found that, for instance, in Aedes aegypti, as you can see here, there is no clear correlation between temperature and precipitation in all over the years. And for other species within the genus Aedes, there are clear correlations. So we need to consider the climatic and weather conditions, the different species, the different genera, the host relationships of these mosquitoes. So it's a broad spectrum of biodiversity that needs to be considered to improve our knowledge on the emerging risks which are related to vectors and pathogens which cause problems then in human health. So finally, the last slide. We did also training and outreach quite a lot. So we had a workshop for PhD. We had candidates. We had several PhD candidates making their PhD within the project, but also we have included bachelor and master thesis. And not only that, we even installed a new master program, a new international master program on environment, climate change, and health in our university in Bayreuth during this project, which is trying to integrate medical perspectives and ecological perspectives for One Health. We also had some interactions with policymakers, journalists, outreach blogs, and we also did a symposium on why is biodiversity important for One Health. Thank you very much.
Thank you a lot, Karl. So let's move on to the next talk, and don't hesitate to raise your questions in the Q&A function. Okay, so now it's for Dr. Forest projects by Michael.
Yeah, thank you very much, Sophie. So I will introduce you the Dr. Forests project. So it's about the diversity of forests affecting our human health and well-being. And as you can see from the little map, we work together with colleagues from 5 different countries in Europe and from different universities and institutions. So when we started this project, and I presume when also BiodivERsA started to think about the call, the relation between nature and human health was mainly studied by comparing more urban versus some kind of green spaces. And we learned a lot about contact to nature and health effects. But what is kind of missing, or what was missing, is the question whether the diversity of nature actually makes a difference in these health effects. So, and therefore we designed our study to compare both in major forests but also in experimental plantations gradients of tree and forest biodiversity, and studied these effects of forest biodiversity on human health, focusing on different health-related ecosystem services, but also disservices. And I will present the results through a little video we produced, which summarizes this very nicely in 3 minutes, so I should also stay in time. let's hope it will start.
The Dr. Forest project was set up across 5 countries in Europe to quantify the impact of forest biodiversity on human health. Does forest diversity matter to human health? Could biodiversity decrease negative health impacts? 4 interdisciplinary teams conducted research to answer these questions. Dr. Forest investigated how people perceive forest biodiversity and how actual and perceived biodiversity affects human health. This involved people sorting photos and recordings based on how diverse they thought the forest was, assessing relaxation by measuring a stress hormone in saliva and recording brainwaves, questionnaires measuring mental well-being, and an experiment in peri-urban forests with low, medium or high tree species richness. Results show that forest environments are strongly related to mental well-being, and the more a forest is perceived to be visually biodiverse, the greater the benefit. In terms of acoustics, bird diversity had a small, positive effect. Forests can also benefit other aspects of human health. They can protect us from heat. Forest structure is strongly linked to heat buffering capacity, i.e. the cooling effect of forests. Tree composition plays a secondary role, but tree diversity has little direct influence. Forest buffering capacity can be over 10 degrees Celsius on hot days, leading people to perceive forests as cool and comfortable. Forests can be a source of beneficial plants and mushrooms. Higher proportions of conifers can decrease medicinal plant growth and mushroom diversity as they close the canopy and acidify the soil. Some forest characteristics alter the risk of tick-borne diseases, such as Lyme disease. Risk of infection was increased with a closed canopy due to less understory cover and increased humidity. Mixed conifer broadleaf forests showed a 40% reduction in the risk of infection. Greater animal diversity in the forest also plays a role in decreasing the risk of tick-borne diseases. Furthermore, findings suggest that forests can protect us from air pollution, with greater leaf area and crown complexity increasing particulate filtration. Dr. Forest shed light on the complex interactions between forest characteristics and human health. The magnitude of observed benefits depended strongly on the health outcome assessed. Notably, effects were always positive or negligible, never negative. Dr. Forest suggests that forest management should focus not only on tree diversity, but also forest structure and composition. Project findings indicate that biodiversity management can positively impact public health. However, different aspects of forest biodiversity influence various health outcomes, suggesting trade-offs in management approaches. Dr. Forest provides guidelines to optimise forest management for human health benefits and local community needs. These guidelines assist forest managers in devising strategies to enhance health while minimising risks.
Yeah, so this, I think, Nathalie summarized what we did and the main results. And I just wanted to show this little graph here on the left, showing that we have these trade-offs, and meaning that if we manage forests for health aspects, we certainly can promote certain health or health-promoting environments, mitigate also disservices, but not always at the same location. And I think this is very important, for example, for the design of health and healing forests and things like that. And for further information, you can see our website, and with a QR code, you can go back again to the video. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, and thanks for the great video. And sorry for the cut in the middle of your video. Okay, so now I will show another video because unfortunately there is nobody from the BiodiV project, but they had the time to prepare a video, so I will share it with you.
Charlotte Siro, and Joachim and I are very sorry we were not able to be here with you today, but we wanted to share with you some of our main results of the BiodiV project, which was interested to investigate the services of marine protected areas through the lens of trophic diversity. So in this project, we investigated this question through 3 ecosystem level, so at community level, population level, and then digestive microbiota level. And each of this package or community were led by 3 European labs, so the CRIOB at Perpignan in France for the community, the GMIT in Ireland for the fish population, and the ULB for the digestive microbiota in Belgium. And we, despite the fact that we had 3 different levels, we tried to gather all the information we got from these different ecosystem levels, and we tried to correlate these data to different services that we can find, knowing like productivity, spillover, nutritional quality for fish flesh, nutrient recycling, and individual health. So as I told you, 3 different work package, and for this presentation, I will focus more on work package 1 for clarity reasons. It is important to remind you that the MetroDiver were sampled in 3 different areas in France with MPAs. So the first was the Bonifacio MPAs, the Blue Coast near Marseille, and the third one is focused on the Vermeil Coast region around Banyuls. In this region, we can see 2 main MPAs, so Banyuls, as I told you, and the Cap de Creus. And both of them have fully protected area as well as partially protected areas. For work package 1, there was 23 UVC sites. So UVC means underwater visual sensors that that provides divers to dive and count the different fish from the different species, and also to measure them to estimate the violence. For work package 2 and 3, 15 fishing zones have been investigated with local fishermen. So as I told you, I will focus on work package 1 with the first objective that have been to set up a new statistical method to characterize the spillover. And we choose the INLA model, that is a Bayesian model that can take into account the autocorrelation of spatial data. And it was the first time for characterizing the spillover that this method have been used. And I wanted a bit to make you know how it works. Just a quick explanation. Basically, it's kind of a mixed model with actually an autocorrelation through this mesh. So just to show you, here is the coast, and here is the mesh that's allowed to take into account the autocorrelation of spatial data. And once we have this INLA method, we decided to characterize the spillover, and first the qualitative spillover. So here you have the spillover model on biomass, and you can see that the coefficient that correspond to the distance to Banyuls MPA centroid is significantly different than 0. So you have here a significant effect of the distance to explain the biomass. And the novelty here is that we also explain the nutrient spillover, so a qualitative spillover, and that we tried to know whether some nutrient were more exported or less exported than others. And here you can see the Bayesian model, the INLA model for the omega-3. And here you can see that, that the zone has an effect on the quantity of omega-3, meaning that for the omega-3, the export of this nutrient is not only related to biomass. So the conclusion of what I showed you here was that MPA not only export biomass, but also provide specific nutrient to local fisheries. And that's what I explained with the omega-3 nutrient. This will be the focus on the paper 2. And we are now gathering all the teams to understand this conclusion in light of the trophic diversity or processes change. We also wanted to see whether there was a change in fish prey, and here we are collaborating with Work Package 2. And we also wanted to see whether fish microbiota could explain this modification. So with Work Packet 3, that already published 2 papers that you can find in the literature now. Well, if you have other questions, because it's very fast, it's very quick, don't hesitate to send me a message, an email, and I thank you very much for your attention.
Okay, so we can, I think, move to the discussion part with the 3 first presentations, and I will hand over to Stephanie Thomas from DiMoC project to moderate this session. So thanks a lot, Stephanie, for this, and don't hesitate to write your question in the Q&A section.
Thank you very much, Sophie, and thank you all the contributions here in this session about the first project presenting their results. And we have a first question with Karin Zaunberger.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the presentations. I have actually 2 questions. One is for the first one for ANTIVERSA. There was this slide which showed the distribution worldwide, and it came up that in Latin America, notably in Brazil, and also in some parts of Africa, there seemed to be very high antimicrobial resistance. I wonder whether there's any explanation for that. And if I may, I put already the second question. This is for Dr. Forrest. I mean, has there been any attempt to actually try to quantify what it would mean in terms of less cost for the health service? I mean, thinking if more people would actually go out in nature and probably boost their immune system, and that this should actually have a measurable impact on less cost for the public health sector. I wonder whether there's been any attempt or any idea, I don't want to call it modeling, but I mean trying to make an estimate on what this would mean, knowing that politicians, that's where they then eventually start to listen when they realize that actually it can be quite a lot of cost savings on the one hand side if the population was more healthy. Thank you.
So I think I just start answering first. I hope that's okay. Yeah, so the explanation is twofold. The one is that antibiotics are more freely available in those countries, so they, get sold directly, not via a medical doctor. And the second reason is that water treatment is oftentimes not functional or not even existent, so sewage gets released directly.
Okay, so then maybe I could answer the second question. Unfortunately, we have no such data, and because our consortium, we focused on the natural science part and the medical part, so we had no socioeconomic work packages included. All in all, the health effects for the individual person obviously are not very large. But if you add that up on a public health perspective, of course, there could be significant impacts on public health costs and or costs related to health services. But unfortunately, from our project, we don't have specific data on that.
Thank you for giving this detailed feedback. And Michael, I have a question for you too, because you led one of the few projects that really focused not only on health aspects, which you maybe monetarize better, but also on well-being. And how challenging is it to incorporate well-being into biodiversity health context?
Yeah, I mean, the well-being part is mainly covered by the mental health aspect of our studies. And here, as you saw, we had different approaches, working with physiological measures to interviews with people in the field. And there is a small but significant effect of tree and forest biodiversity on these well-being factors. And there are these standardized scores that you can kind of ask questionnaires and people. And again, the sheer presence of forests being out in nature had a much bigger effect than the diversity of the forest itself. But interestingly, what we found is that the perceived diversity, so what people think or what they perceive as being less or more diverse, this had a stronger effect than the diversity we as scientists usually quantify. So this makes a strong, let's say, a strong statement that in future studies, we should not only look at what we as natural scientists quantify as biodiversity, but actually what people perceive as biodiversity, because that perceived biodiversity has then the direct influence or link to mental well-being. And I think this is interesting, one interesting finding from our studies as well.
Thank you so much, Michael. That's really bringing some thoughts into our discussion here. And I would like to invite the audience to put your questions into the Q&A session, but I would have another one for Carl, but maybe Magnus, you would like to start first.
Well, actually follow up on the previous question. It would be interesting also because I think we've seen this also before, that people they might think that a forest is diverse because it looks nice to their eyes, and or they have some preconception. And in Sweden we have these very famous old paintings of forests that people perceive as pristine, although they were actually really the result of very managed forests, previous clear cuts and so on. So I wonder if you could if you're gonna look at how people perceive biodiversity, if you could also see if you inform them about biodiversity, what is real biodiversity, that show them, okay, this forest might look very dead or messy to you, but actually it contains all of these fantastic, interesting bugs and species, whether that would influence their perception and their well-being. So does information and education help them to understand biodiversity? Thank you.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Actually, we did not focus on that part in our mental health part or aspects or work packages, but I know there has been a study exactly doing this kind of work. So informing people and then doing these surveys again, which indeed increased the effects of the diversity effect on mental well-being scores. So, exactly what you said, obviously should have a small but still significant effect. And interestingly, we did a little side study here at our university where we asked similar questions concerning acoustic diversity and mental well-being with different cohorts of students, so including biology students and non-biology students. And we thought that the biology student, maybe they have more information about, ecosystems and functionally diverse systems. So our hypothesis was that those students would show a kind of a strong effect, which indeed we did not found. I think this is still a field of open questions and research, but I know there have been some studies related to that.
Thank you again for rising up this topic. And I would like to come to another question, which is for Karl, because we work together in the DiMoC project about mosquito-borne diseases and diversity, and we gathered a lot of information about infections in birds and mosquitoes, the diversity of viruses globally. So a lot of knowledge was gained within this project, but I know that you have been a long-standing member of the Biodiversity Council in Bavaria. So do you see in this time where you work for this council somehow a shift towards topics of health and One Health in your discussion?
No. So the answer is quite simple. So, and I think in policymaking, the problem is that policymakers rather respond to very short-term perspectives. So if there is a pandemic, if there is a problem, then this will be relevant for policy. But there is very rarely to be seen that proactive decisions that, like also in Dr. Forrest, would have a positive effect in not today, not next week, but rather in the future, and are of more general importance than for the society, but not linked with a clear visibility of a success of a policymaker in the media. This is very difficult to achieve because the complexity of interactions, as we've also shown in DiMoC, is of course a challenge for a simple message that can be communicated. But I think it's clear that there is increasing evidence that not only the diversity within mosquitoes, the diversity within viruses, the diversity within hosts of different kinds like mammals or birds, or the diversity of predatory control. So all that is resulting in positive effects for the human society in the end, reducing the risks, as we've also seen in the first presentation. So there is evidence for dilution effects. There is evidence for efficient control across trophic cascades, but it's a complex system. And we need not only economic conclusions, but also like experts in condensing this information to a very clear strategy in communication that can be brought then to the public and to policymakers. And the policy briefs, of course, is one approach to do so, but still I see a certain deficit in when you talk to journalists and you speak about complexity and variability, then they say, no, slow down, make it more simple. But then you say as a scientist, but nature is not so simple. And then you are in trouble. So we need a better interface. And of course, IPBES is aiming to be this interface, but it's reaching high. We need an interface that is also reaching down then.
Thank you so much for your insights. So I would have a last question for Thomas, but I don't know if we have the time, Sophie, because...
Maybe one more question and then we can move to the break. But yes, one more question.
Maybe short question and short answer. But just to come back to our original discussion about the antimicrobial resistance, which you highlighted in your work, I was wondering, you said there are a lot of different regulations when we see to the countries to Africa and so on, but also within Europe. I just saw last week an informative program on antimicrobial resistance, and this highlights really significant differences also within the EU regulations, so that antibiotics can be bought by patients And this is locally very, very various in different countries. So what do you think about these discrepancies? Is there a need for regulatory adjustments also within the EU?
Yeah, yes, I would say yes. And this is currently discussed. I mean, this is maybe not really our sort of expertise, because this is really something clearly in the clinical realm, you know, or the doctors prescribing or not prescribing. That certainly should be regulated. I think this is the common conception at the moment. The question is if this will happen or not. We clearly see a gradient of an increased resistance in the environment from north to south. And unfortunately, it's an autocorrelation, because it could also be just the temperature. You know, but also prescription rates or rather availability of antibiotics is also a gradient from north to south. So therefore, it's a bit difficult to say if that is really the reason. But of course, it makes a lot of sense. And as far as I know, they endeavor to change regulations or harmonize regulations there. Yeah.
Thank
Sorry,
you.
no, the answer was longer than it should have been.
Thank you. All the contributions here in this session and the discussion highlighting, the next steps we need to do. Sophie,
Yes,
hand over
thanks
to
a
you
lot.
again.
Yes, thanks a lot, Stephanie, and thanks to all speakers for these exciting presentations and discussion. We'll move to a short break, so we will have to shorten a bit the break. So it will be until 10:55, and we will move to the second session of the presentation of the funded project. So thanks a lot to all. Okay, we will slowly restart. We will move to the second session of the funded projects. So I will invite Alejandra, Adam, Yvan, and Klaus to present their projects, and then we will have some time for discussion that will be moderated by Miri Tsalyuk. Okay, so Alejandra first, if you want to start with your project. So I invite you to try to stick to the 5 minutes presentation, and you can start. Thanks, Alejandra.
Great, super. Thank you for inviting. Can you hear me properly? Yes.
Yes.
So I'm introducing NutriV2, that's nutrition as a critical link between biodiversity and BiHealth. And I'm replacing Professor Sarah Leonhardt, who's my chair. I should be able to move the slides, right? Yes. Then there it is. So in this project, we proposed the framework for wild bee studies. We proposed that each bee species would have different nutritional requirements, so that they would look for pollen with different nutrient combinations. And then at the same time, when we alter the landscape, for example, through land use intensity or by simplification of the landscape, we are altering the floral diversity and hence the nutrients that are offered to the bees. And potentially that could lead to mismatches between the nutritional requirements from the bee species and what the landscape is offering to them. And that eventually we could assess that mismatch in health parameters like physiology, element composition, and pathogen resistance. We found that bees have actually diverse responses to landscape stressors based on their traits. So for example, we looked at abundance and survival chances at different species at different levels of complexity in the landscape. And we found some species are actually more vulnerable than others to simplification of the landscape. And we could explain some of those different responses by things like the specialization level of the bees and also the size. We also confirmed that what we proposed in the hypothesis that bees have diverse nutritional needs. So we did that by looking into which kind of pollen they had in their legs, and for a vast number of bees that we found in the landscape, and by looking at the nutrient composition of that pollen. And with that, we came up with these bubbles. Each bubble represents a space of nutrient combination that the bee species lives or depends on, and each of these bubbles belongs to a species that is written there at the bottom. And you can see that even though there are overlaps, of course, their position and the size of these niches is diverse. So this is all with wild bees, which have generally not been studied in that way. So that was actually quite rewarding from this project. And then we went into looking at the health parameters that we mentioned before. And we found that bees' health is actually affected by nutritional deficiencies. We don't really have a definition for health in bees yet, especially for wild bees, other than honeybee. But we did see that, for example, with increasing land use, we saw differences in protein content and glycogen content in the body of the bees. And more interestingly, and this is quite preliminary work, we found that bees that are high in limiting elements like iron, magnesium, calcium were also showing higher resistance to pathogens. Finally, of course, we wanted to include people in our framework because those are the ones managing the land, of course, and making decisions that can alter or enhance these mismatches. And so we did a survey to see how much is actually known about bee nutrition. We looked in, we collected hundreds of responses from different countries around Europe. And in this graph, you can see the perceived notion of bee nutrition. In red would be the percentage of people that think that they don't know enough. And you can see that actually bee nutrition is not well known outside niche professions like beekeepers or seed suppliers that have the highest records of knowledge. Outside that, most people actually don't really think that they know that much. And this is a combination of, well, education, but also how some of these concepts, they are quite new, but also they remain in science and they are not always translated to different stakeholders. So that was also quite an interesting result from this project. And with that, I actually probably I'm a bit short anyway in time or sticking to time, but I want to thank you for your attention and yeah, thank you for all the support for this really nice project.
Thanks a lot for this very clear presentation. So time for question a bit later. So we will move on to the next talk from Adam for the Vodou project. So you can click on the slides and you can contribute the slides yourself.
Thanks very much. Yes, so I'm Adam van Berg and I coordinate the Vodou project. And you can see the project was made of a bunch of institutions across 4 countries in Europe. And transition is not working. Okay, thank you. So we've heard a lot about IPBES today. In 2016, the IPBES published its pollination assessment at a global scale and identified many, many pressures on pollinators. And in the Vodou project, we took inspiration from that summary report where they identified, in fact, a knowledge gap concerning the interplay between land use and disease risk for wild pollinators in particular. And so in Vodou, we're interested in this process, and we decided to work at the landscape scale, replicated in the 4 countries I just spoke of. And we examined the community organization and disease risk along gradients of land urbanization and also the intensification of agriculture. We decided in the end to focus in on specific viral pathogens of honeybees, the black queen cell virus, and the deformed wing virus. Next slide, please. It's not working for me. So we've known for a long time, really, that honeybee colonies, managed honeybee colonies, are challenged by a host of different viral species. And in the case of deformed wing virus, we also know that infection with the parasitic varroa mite can exacerbate the virulence of that particular virus. And we also know that when infected honeybees move into the environment looking for pollen and nectar sources, they can contact wild pollinator species at the site of flowers. And there is some published evidence at the beginning of this project, indeed, from other researchers, that wild bumblebee species have been seen to catch these viral pathogens. Next click, please. But what Voodoo was seeking to do was to assess this level of spillover of pathogens from the managed bees to the wild pollinator community. That's to say the network of multiple species of wild pollinator species and managed honeybees in the environment. Next click, please. And importantly, what we were seeking to do was to see how the way we manage the landscape, how that affects the diversity, the abundance, and the availability of different floral resources, and what that means in terms of reorganizing and rewiring this network of community interactions, and whether that affects the probability of pathogen spillover between species. Next, please. So our first key message from the main study that we've done is really that the prevalence of viruses varies amongst the different pollinators we examined, and it is also shaped by the landscape. So if you notice at the top, the honeybee is quite clearly the primary reservoir species for both viruses indeed, and this is also confirmed in laboratory experiments. But you can also see that other pollinator groups have levels of viral prevalence in them as well. The other thing I want you to take from this slide is that as you move along the landscape gradient from an intensive agricultural landscape through to the urbanized land cover, what you see is different responses to that gradient in terms of the degree of prevalence of viral pathogens. So in fact, the situation is worsened as you move into the urban environment for the managed honeybee, but it declines for the wild pollinator groups to variable degrees. Next, please. The second key message is that the transmission of these viruses between honeybees and wild pollinators is driven by viral density and the degree of ecological niche overlap. So what we have found is that where you've got the situation of a greater density of honeybees, individuals and colonies, and that's coupled with a higher prevalence and load of viruses in those colonies, and then you add that to situations in the landscape where there's a greater degree of overlap in flora use between the managed honeybee, for example, and this bumblebee species in the purple circle there. When you have these two factors combining in the landscape, next click, please. What you end up with is a much greater risk of viral spillover from managed honeybees to wild pollinators. Next, please. So our take-home messages really today are that honeybees are confirmed as being the main viral host for both the viruses that we examined. But the virus is detected in wild pollinator groups and species, albeit in variable ways, depending on the group in question. And in terms of what we can do about this problem, simple thing is to boost the diversity of pollen and nectar sources in the landscape. That is to increase the habitat heterogeneity of landscapes. And this will do two things. It should dilute the risk from pathogen spillover from the managed population of honeybees to wild pollinator species. And it will also directly boost wild pollinator populations, as you've just seen, in terms of their nutritional health and ultimately their diversity. Next slide, please. So I'll just conclude to thank all the members of the Voodoo Consortium, in particular all the students and the postdoc and the master students, technicians without whom the project isn't possible, and again the funders. And just to point you to the Voodoo project website up there on the top right, where you can follow the project and where we publish all our papers and lay summaries of each paper as well. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Adam, and thanks a lot for the very clear presentation. We will move to the next project from Yvan for the suppressed soil project. So the floor is yours, Yvan.
All right. Hello, everybody. In this project, we're a number of partners from Switzerland, Germany, and France. And at the start of the project, we also expanded the scope of the soil that we were to study by interacting with colleagues in Serbia as well. So next one, please. So in this project, we focus on disease suppressiveness. It's a particular property of certain soils. Certain soils have it, others don't. And in those soils, the soil microbiota is able to protect the crops against pathogens, usually fungal pathogens, usually pathogens that attack the root. So it's kind of a battle in the root zone between pathogens likely to attack the roots and the native microorganism from the soil that may protect the plant. So this concept of disease suppressiveness, it's not a new concept, but it's becoming very important these days. But the knowledge on disease suppressiveness remains patchy. So the question we asked ourselves was, which microbiome traits are associated with suppressiveness? Is this suppressiveness, which is typically assessed in relation to a particular type of pathogen, is that relevant as well when you consider potential damage that can be caused by insect pests? And also, can this property be managed? Can, for instance, organic matter be used to stimulate the soil microbiome and confer suppressiveness or increase the level of suppressiveness? And finally, in this context of global change, what are the implications for this type of property? Is that going to impact positively or negatively microbial diversity, and especially microbial diversity involved in suppressiveness? So on the picture here, you've got the comparison of two soils. One is suppresses the soil to the right, and the next one is not. And if you grow a plant in there and you add a large amount of pathogen, you've got a good level of protection in the suppressive soil on the right, and poor protection in the non-suppressive soil, the conducive soil on the left. The other guy down there on the picture is particular insects we focused to assess the relevance of those biocontrol mechanism for protection against insect pests. Next one, please. So among some of the main results that we had, we wanted to compare suppressive soils already known for being suppressive in different areas, to assess whether the property associated with suppressiveness were local, regional, or more global. And so we found some common properties between all those suppressive soils, but also we noticed the importance of local properties. So it means the scale is important. To the right here, you've got a map of a region in Switzerland where we picked up a number of soils that we've been monitoring for a long number of years now. And this is the type of soil that we compare, so at that local regional scale, and then in comparison with soils of similar type that are located in different countries and for which that type of property has been as well assessed. The second result I would like to highlight is the fact that in our survey, we discovered new microbial actors that are potentially involved in suppressiveness. And for some of them, mycorrhizal fungi, we tested them under greenhouse conditions to establish their actual contribution to that property. A third main result is the fact that in the case of insect pests, actually soil that are suppressive towards disease can also reduce damage caused by insects. And global change conditions will affect soil suppressiveness, especially under conventional agriculture condition. And this is what we've seen using the setup at the bottom here, where we can manipulate the amount of rainfall. Okay, next one, please. Now, practically speaking, 4 implications. The first one is that suppressiveness is rather site-specific. So it emphasizes the need to assess locally this type of property. So in the approach of soil analysis, this is something that should be included. The second one is that soil biodiversity is important for suppressiveness, and so including biodiversity monitoring tools can be useful when assessing the importance or the usefulness of new farming practices. And also then back to this issue of suppressiveness is not only for a particular pathogen, but it can also bring protection from insect pests. So microbiome management can have a number of different benefits. And finally, global change can affect suppressiveness potential, which means soil data identifies being suppressive today may not be suppressive tomorrow. This needs to be taken into consideration when designing new cropping systems. Thank you for your attention.
Thanks a lot, Yvan, for this great talk. So we'll move to the last one and then be able to discuss all together. So Klaus, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Sophie.
Thank you.
Thank you. Last, but hopefully not least, this is the one and only ever funded synthesis project under Biodiversity or Biodiversity Plus, so we are special. This project fund prod is about relationships between functional diversity and food production and quality under ecological intensification. Being a synthesis project, and Magnus already mentioned that, means we had to rely on existing data. We were also kind of a smaller consortium in the sense of funded colleagues we could employ in the project. But thanks to this fantastic group of medical scientists and environmental scientists that you can see here, I think we were still very successful and productive. So let me give you an overview of FundProd. It does work. Perfect. Thank you. So we were looking at major drivers of anthropogenic change in agricultural landscapes, being land use change, both landscape change, but also land use intensification and climate change, and how this affects functional diversity. And this is the key point in FundProd. We were not looking at traditional taxonomic diversity. We were focusing on, instead of the number of species or which species, we were focusing on what functional abilities, attributes, and properties do those species have to affect then, if you follow that scheme down, regulating and provisioning agroecosystems. So it's a much more functional approach, and we were then looking at how this affects agroecosystem health and human well-being. As a first part of this consortial work, we developed a framework and we provided a review of the evidence for these individual links in this flowchart here. That's the De La Riva paper you can see down there. And then we also developed a paper where we suggested how to analytically approach studies in the future that would look at the relationship between biodiversity and health, led by Werner Ulrich. Now, from this point, a few details from individual reviews. Our great colleague Roman Bucher, who was the employed scientist in the project, led here. For example, when we look at these bugs here, these are ground beetles. They are really the dominant generalist predators in European agricultural systems, together with spiders. And we wanted to look at the effect of landscape changes and land use intensification on the functional diversity of this group. In this pan-European review of data sets across Europe, we didn't find any strong relationships or effects of local management or landscape changes on the functional diversity of those beetles. But as you can see in this graph to the right, we found a strong relationship between the functional diversity of local ground beetle communities and the pest control service they perform, especially when you move from a very low functional diversity in a certain community to communities with intermediate levels of functional diversity. Pest control services are almost doubling. So there's a strong relationship of functional diversity and ecosystem service provision here. When we then go on and look a little bit more into detail for the health component, together with our nutritional scientists and health scientists in the consortium, we are currently working on a synthesis looking at the effect of organic agriculture on this whole cascade you see here. And there's now very limited evidence, very little literature on effects of organic farming and functional diversity of different communities. It's building up over the last 2 years now. We also found rather limited support for this strong relationship between functional diversity and recreation in agricultural landscapes. What there is there's quite a lot of supporting data for strong relationships between regulating agroecosystems like pollination and pest control and food production and food quantity. And we also found effects on human health by higher values of recreational
ecosystem services and food production, of course. So to wrap it up, we were lucky applying for this project. The most recent CAP and the eco schemes were not yet implemented or even phrased, but we really addressed major aspects of these eco schemes, which are very relevant for the future of the European agriculture in the next years. Climate change, environmental care, landscape preservation are all the major drivers we focus on. What we found now in FunProd is that functional diversity is in fact really important for the provision of several ecosystem services. And I just gave you the one example of functional diversity in ground beetles. And to give you a more precise detail, we found, for example, that ground beetle communities which are dominated by smaller species have higher pest control values and services than ground beetle communities which have a larger share of larger ground beetle species, okay? But the policy implications here are really tricky to address, and we have the panel discussion later. The question here is really how can we develop agricultural landscapes and local management to the benefit of those traits and those aspects of functional diversity that we observe to be beneficial for ecosystem services. And of course, how do we encourage those management practices with farmers and stakeholders? Thank you for your attention.
Great. Thank you very much, Klaus, and thanks for sticking to the time also. So I will now hand over to Miri for moderating this session. Don't hesitate to introduce you, Miri, first. Thanks.
Hi. Can you hear me well?
Yes, we can hear you, but we cannot see you.
I did open the video. Interesting.
Yes, we can see the beautiful landscape. But
I see.
Oh, it's not a majority.
Okay.
Yes, it's working very well. Thanks, Miri.
Yeah, thank you, Sophie, and thank you for these really, really great talks. I'm a knowledge broker for BiodivERsA. I was responsible for producing the policy briefs. And I'm going to moderate this session as well as the last session. Please, I invite all the audience to write your questions in the Q&A. That there were such a rich information in these talks. Maybe the first question to Alejandra. Are you here? So you presented that the landscape diversity, especially in your own paper, that the landscape diversity and not floral species diversity is what is influencing pollinator diversity and pollen diversity. So can you explain this result a little bit, and most importantly, what are the management implications of that?
Thank you. That's an interesting question. So actually, what I refer to as landscape diversity is mostly referring to the landscape compositions around it and in between the experimental plots, which are agricultural plots. And we did find that the floral diversity within the plots had less of an impact on the bees than the landscape heterogeneity around them. But we do think that this landscape heterogeneity is linked to a general floral diversity in the landscape, so at landscape level. So that's something from my slides, perhaps, but we do link it to floral diversity because definitely floral diversity is the link between the nutrients and the bee health. That's from our results. And for management, that has an implication greatly, because it means you basically need to talk to your neighbors and you need to have sort of a shared management of the land that is at a higher level than just managing your plots. It would mean perhaps that hedges around your plots are useful, but that you also need to have patches of forest and spaces where the bees also, because this is not just about what they eat, but also where they are living, right? Their nests, spaces, the water sources, and so on. So that's the main implication that it has for management. You really should have coherent planning in the landscape level.
Yeah, thank you so much, Alejandra. And maybe talking about talking to your neighbors, and maybe extend that also to Adam. So you also show that landscape simplification or reduction in non-arable land greatly reduce the both species, pollinator species, and pollinator and flower interaction. So can you also a little bit talk about the management implications specifically now with the reduction of some of the conditionality rules in the CAP?
Okay, so to be clear, the main sort of trend that we saw in our data set, which was these 48 replicated landscapes, a third of them were urban, a third were agricultural, and a third were a mix, was that actually in general terms, the urban areas tended to support a much higher diversity of wild pollinator species richness and abundance. And that effect was basically down to the heterogeneity of the landscape, because there was many gardens that were sampled and public green spaces and so on. Compare that with the intensive areas, which were very intensive, and there was very few semi-natural elements in them. So those were the two extremes. And so, as you saw from the slide I sent, as you move into that more urban area, the risk to the wild pollinator species actually declined in terms of pathogen spread. And we put that down to a dilution effect. And basically, we also detected that the insects are going to be distributing themselves more widely across diverse floral resources. And we actually found for DWV, one of the viruses, a direct dilution effect to wild pollinator abundance. So what can you do about it? I think really it's thinking back to the lesson you can learn from the urban for the agricultural environment is increasing the spatial and temporal heterogeneity of floral resources in that sort of a situation, the agricultural context, and then you will see a corresponding elevation of pollinator diversity, but also hopefully disease risk mitigation as well. So we need to move away from very simplified agricultural landscapes to more diverse ones. In short, my response to that.
Good. Thank you so much. So there's a question here from Helen Suppelet. Sorry if I mispronounced your name. The question is for Klaus. So do you intend to look at the effect of functional diversity on gross margins or economic profit for farmers?
Yeah, thanks for this question. And I mean, it's a pretty boring answer, because I can only also refer to the fact that our consortium didn't have any economists, and therefore we cannot address it in FunProd. But on the same kind of subject, I'm working together with an environmental economist right now called Frank Wetzold in our DFG project, Trough Cost, where we look at different conservation goals in grasslands, agricultural managed grasslands. And amongst those conservation goals are also goals that focus on functional diversity or optimizing certain levels of ecosystem services. And here we do exactly that. So here we look at the kind of cost benefit from natural regulatory services and costs by adjusting your farming practices to promote those. So this is probably the closest to your question what I'm currently on to.
Thank you, Klaus. And if there are more questions, please don't hesitate to put it in the Q&A box. So we're looking forward to your questions. So maybe are there any questions rolling in? Let's see. Yes, so Oliver asks, can you please specify some observed features of suppressive soil with soil texture? For example, soil type, geographic characteristic.
I didn't hear, Miri, I didn't hear the question.
So can you specify some observed features of the suppressive soil?
Okay,
so,
okay.
Like texture, soil type, geographic characteristics, like laws, or
In a nutshell, suppressive soils are a pain because in a given area, you may have a similar type of soils in terms of pedology, texture, organic matter content, pH, and some of those soils are suppressive and others are not suppressive. That's also what makes them sometimes difficult to spot, because based on standard agronomic analysis that are regularly performed, nothing sticks out for those soils. So there are really macrobiota specificity that may sometimes be quite local. Now, of course, it's influenced by the soil properties, texture, and so on. It's also largely influenced by soil farming and the farming practices. And actually, some of those soils, they are known to develop after a set of particular cropping sessions with especially crop monoculture. So you have, which means, unfortunately, there's no simple way of identifying a soil that is suppressive using routine analyses that are already being performed, and a specific assessment needs to be carried out under standardized condition in greenhouse tests.
Thank you, Yvan. Actually, I have a follow-up for that. So, if I understand it correctly, so suppressiveness is something like you either born with or not. So, but what are the so kind of you introduced this term of microbial management. So, can you talk a little bit about the implications for farmers, because you show some really incredible results for reducing pathogens for crops. So how can farmers yield this knowledge to their benefit?
Yeah, well, there's probably there's two main avenues for making good use of the microbes you have in your soil. The first one is perhaps to consider that management of organic matter is important, because the organic matter is what feeds the microbes. So the way of reusing organic matter in agriculture, using compost and so on, this is likely to be very important. Another issue that might be also very important is the choice of crop cultivars, because the cultivars, they differ from one another in terms of their sensitivity to a particular pathogen, but also they differ in their ability to recruit soil microorganisms that are able to protect them. So it's a combination here. And then also you have got all the farming practices that are more or less favorable for pathogen in terms of whether you plow or you don't plow, whether you bring a lot of water or not water, whether you choose fertilizers according to this type of issue or not.
Thank you so much. So Saraji Mashur, she's writing from the Benin National Institute for Agricultural Research, and the question is, can BiodivERsA, so the honeybees are declining, and there's a question, can BiodivERsA support more research on Africa to address the Varroa virus and the honeybee decline?
Maybe I should.
So maybe Magnus, yeah. For you.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure if the question is. It seems like you're asking if we could fund the projects to restore pollinator life and biodiversity, and the answer is there that BiodivERsA Plus is funding research to provide knowledge for implementation, policy, and management decision, but not to do the work or to fund the actual restoration or conservation work. So that is but if you're asking for more for the research side, yes. We have different calls every year, so you will have to look at what we are providing in terms of funding. If a researcher, it's a virtual pot of money, meaning that each funder will fund researchers in their own country under the same umbrella, all evaluated in the same way. But if you're from a particular country, you would need to have a funder in that country to be directly funded. But a lot of the funders allow that resources are being spent across the globe. So, for example, in my case, we're in Sweden. Swedish researchers could collaborate with researchers in Africa that are not part of the call itself, but the funding would then go through the Swedish researchers. So that is how it works. But we are always open also for new funders to come in from any country in the world. So if you have contacts with your national funders, get them to contact us and we'll talk to them for sure. Thank you.
Thank you, Magnus. So we have maybe a couple more minutes left. So are there any questions last questions you would like to put in? So
maybe if there is time.
1 minute.
Yeah.
Can I just ask well, maybe it's not so quick, but a question to Klaus, perhaps, on the synthesis, because for us, it would be interesting to hear a little bit about your experience about that and whether you find this type of funding useful, and whether this is something we should look at again for coming calls and so on. And if you have a longer answer, you could get in contact. For sure, we will listen. But maybe have just a few reflections on that.
Thanks for the opportunity. Yeah, I mean, there's even a YouTube video, I think, from one of the Biodiversity sessions where I was already trying to promote this kind of action because it was really a pleasure to do it. It's for the funders, it comes relatively cheap. Of course, this is it relies a lot on in-kind input from the consortium members. But it was, especially in such a multidisciplinary project like FundProd, it was a real learning curve for everyone. We all learned from each other. It was still very productive. And having that bit of support with a dedicated postdoc for 2 years, it also increased the motivation of everyone because we were sure that in year 2 and 3 someone would come in to support us. And the acquisition of all these data sets and everything, this is hard work. And most of the consortium members, they don't have that kind of time in their daily academic life. But I mean, all in all, it was great. I think we generated quite some knowledge from these synthesis activities. And we are already together sitting, talking about follow-up initiatives. So yes, definitely, it should be an action in every single Biodiversity call, in my opinion.
Take that note of that. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for all the speakers. I have so many more questions, but unfortunately we have to move on. So please, you can contact the speakers privately or any of us for more questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for this great discussion and great talks. So we will move to the last session of the funded project, so not the least. And I invite Herwig first and then Nathalie, and then we will move on to an interview by Julie, our leader of the work package on communication within BiodiVERSA Plus. But let's start with Herwig.
Okay, thank you very much for organizing this meeting. So we were doing the BiodiV-AFREID project. As you can see, the title, should we worry about biodiversity and its link with emerging infectious diseases? It was interesting to see that this session was called the COVID-linked projects, because originally we were not COVID-linked at all. We started in early 2020, so the COVID had not yet started. We had coronaviruses in the project already, but it was certainly not the main topic. We focused in BiodiV-AFREID on biodiversity in Africa, and you see the different groups there. We actually had 2 partners as subcontractors in Africa, in Ivory Coast, and in Congo. And so what we basically were trying to do, and I think I can move the slides. Yes. So the purpose of the objectives of the project were to see how biodiversity conditions would favor or disfavor the spillover of infectious agents into human populations. And for that, we wanted to see whether there was a link in biodiversity, in the changes in communities of small mammals, and we focused on rodents, shrews, and bats, in areas where there was more or less influence of humans, and whether that was linked then to the pathogens that were carried by these small mammals. And originally we focused mostly on Mpox and on Ebola, because these were clearly emerging infectious diseases that created a lot of interest. And we did that in different places in the DRC, in Congo, and also in Ivory Coast. We did a lot of field work, was very intensive field work in this project, where we tried to describe the biodiversity based on trappings that we did of bats and small mammals, but also acoustic biodiversity. We also looked at eDNA in different ways. And so we tried to describe the biodiversity. We collected the small mammals also for taking samples, all under very high biosecurity and biosafety conditions, because we were working in areas where before there had been Ebola outbreaks. And as you can see here on this background here, there are places in Africa where around villages there's a lot of change in the landscape because of the cutting off of forest and changing the forest into agricultural land. And so that's what we tried to investigate, whether there were differences. And we were thinking about biodiversity in the way that you see on this small graph here, that as biodiversity on the x-axis is decreasing, you would get probably a higher risk of disease emergence until biodiversity is so low that there is hardly anything left. And then, of course, there is no more risk for disease emergence. So that's what we tried to look at. The results are quite a lot of results, and we are actually still working on it. It's work in progress. What I'm showing here is just from one area where we worked, where on the left hand you see the diversity of the bats, and on the right hand you see the diversity of the terrestrial small mammals in the different habitats around a village. And as you can see, for the bats, there is not that much change in the number, in the different species of bats, but there is quite a change in the proportional presence of the different species. On the right-hand side, you can see that for the terrestrial small mammals, there is quite a big difference. And actually, the largest biodiversity there is what we see in the intermediate areas, not so much in the primary undisturbed forest, not so much in the village, but in those areas in between, which is not the case for the bats. And of course, these bats, they are much more mobile. We also looked at so-called bushmeat, just a term we rather not use. So it's wild animals that are hunted by local communities for food. And we also included them in the study. Then we also looked at the pathogens that we could find in those different samples. And there we found a large diversity, very large diversity in some of the bats in several groups of viruses, which creates, of course, some concern. So what do we do as far as societal impact is concerned? We had a lot of exchanges with local communities and the places where we worked. We also worked, of course, together with the local scientists, which was quite important in giving them also an uplift in their reputation in the country so that people listen more to them. We had discussions with local authorities. We also had a large biodiversity conference in Kisangani where we could actually stress these issues linked to health. And we also made several videos. So with that, I think I've very, very quickly shown this very large project, of which we still have some ongoing work to do on the analysis and on the outreach. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Herwig, for this very clear and efficient talk. So now we will hand over to your colleague Nathalie, and then we will come back to this interview with Julie afterwards. So I hand over to Nathalie for the BiodivERsA project.
Yes, thank you. So this project was about the biodiversity of rodents and rodent-borne diseases in forest and urban green spaces of Europe, and it was led by a broad interdisciplinary European consortium. So, we are living in an era shaped by pandemics, and many of which are driven by zoonosis. And human activities, they play a major role in the zoonotic crisis because we are disrupting ecosystems and undermining the critical role that wildlife biodiversity plays in controlling the spread of the zoonotic pathogens. And small mammals are key reservoirs of these zoonotic agents, and in Western countries, forests and urban parks are main places where humans and wildlife come into contact, and they are hotspots for rodent-borne zoonotic risks. So with BiodivERsA, we wanted to study the intricate relationships between small mammals, the microorganisms they carry, and their interactions with humans. So we aim to better understand how their diversity shapes the prevalence and circulation of rodent-borne zoonotic pathogens in European forests and urban parks. Specifically, we are focused on 3 objectives: describing small mammal assemblages and their pathogens, modeling how changes in small mammals' diversity influence the spread of these pathogens, and engaging with stakeholders to enhance strategies for preventing zoonosis and raising public awareness. So here are some key results from our project. So first, we've developed a comprehensive database on small mammals and the zoonotic pathogens they carry in both forests and urban parks across 34 sites in Western Central Europe. We've surveyed over 4,000 small mammals, representing 18 species, and we have detected 4 families of zoonotic viruses and 10 genera of zoonotic bacteria. We found some important contrast between the ecosystems of forest and urban parks. While both have a similar diversity of rodents, the species composition differs. In urban parks, the biggest zoonotic risks come from rats and wood mice, and we are seeing pathogen spread mainly through direct transmission. In contrast, in forests, the risk is posed by species like benguels and yellow-naked mice, with pathogens that are often vector-borne, mainly transmitted by ticks or fleas. And finally, we identified that environmental factors are key drivers in the distribution of these pathogens. Pathogens respond differently to these environmental factors like temperature or humidity or habitat type. So looking ahead, climate change is likely to significantly alter the distribution of rodent-borne pathogens, affecting risk patterns at local but also across Europe. So the third breakthrough I want to highlight is our modeling of the relationship between biodiversity and zoonotic diseases. In France, we found that small mammal biodiversity can actually help regulate the circulation of certain pathogens, and this is what we call the dilution effect. For example, we discovered that a higher diversity of small mammals can limit the prevalence of orthopox virus. However, it's not all clear-cut. In some cases, we found no effect or even a positive effect of small mammal diversity on the prevalence of other zoonotic diseases like leptospirosis. So this shows us that the relationship between biodiversity and human health is complex and context-dependent. So it means we cannot assume biodiversity always works the same way across all diseases. And monitoring small mammals and the pathogens they carry is crucial, especially in response to human impact and climate change. So here are 2 more breakthroughs with major implications for stakeholders. So on the left, you can see that we have modeled the impact of rodent management on zoonotic risk, focusing on a specific case, the rats and Seoul hantavirus in the city of Lyon in France. Our findings show that when you reduce rat population, it initially lowers the circulation of the virus. However, there is a catch. If rodent control methods are not species-specific, they can harm small mammal diversity in urban parks, and in turn, this could decrease the virus in the rat population above a certain threshold of rodent control. Second, we analyzed responses from questionnaires on public knowledge and perceptions of rodents and rodent-borne zoonosis. And one key takeaway, although not surprising, is that people who know about or think they know about rodent-transmitted diseases are more likely to take precautions against zoonosis. So this reinforces the idea that knowledge is a critical foundation for making prevention strategies effective. So in conclusion, one of the very naive but key lessons I've learned through the BiodivERsA project, and what I believe has been crucial to its success, is the importance of taking time and energy to build trust with stakeholders. And we provided clear and accessible information, and we actively consult with them. So we were able to engage partners and lay the groundwork for an effective transdisciplinary collaboration. And this trust has not only helped us achieve our goals, but also has paved the way for new projects to emerge. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Nathalie. So now I will hand over to my colleague Julie. So as I told you, she's the work package leader on communication within Biodiversity Plus partnership for an interview style between you two, and maybe we can also open to questions afterwards with the audience. So the floor is yours, Julie.
Thank you very much, Sophie. And thank you, Nathalie and Herwig, for your presentation. So now let's explore how these two projects have impacted society and helped authorities manage health risks related to zoonotic diseases. Nathalie, this question is for you. Can you explain how you worked with the city of Lyon in France?
Yes, so as I showed with the slide, before the project began, we contacted all people in Lyon and people from the veterinary health, public health, and biodiversity, and we discussed about the sites where it could be interesting to work and people who needed to be informed on our results. So we really very soon had this network of One Health people. And so as we had results on, for example, the high circulation of Seoul virus in the city of Lyon, we could tell them, okay, we have this, do not worry. We knew it existed 10 years ago, so it's not really important because we don't have so many human cases, but maybe you can take some precautionary measures or change some behavior to limit the exposure of professional people working there. So I think it was the first impact for people working in this place where we detected an important zoonotic risk. We could also see that most of the rats and most of Seoul was in a particular place in the park where there is a lot of garbage from the city. And so there was a discussion about how to improve the management of all these garbages. And so they made a lot of work to improve the infrastructure. And now there is no more rats in this place. There are still rats in the parks, but there is no more Seoul virus, and it's been 2 years. So I think it was quite good. And also the last point is with the modeling of the rodent control, we could provide other arguments to say, okay, you really have to use methods that are very specific, that targets the mouse and the rats, or if they don't target the species, they don't kill the animal that is trapped, and then you can release the non-target species. And like that, you maintain the biodiversity in the different places, and so you will still regulate the circulation of the Seoul virus. I think it's the 3 main points.
Thank you very much. So, but your project was focused locally. Can your framework be adapted for use at a national level?
Yes, so it's true that we were very surprised to see how the sites we chose influence the results we had. So it's very difficult to say, okay, we have a result and you can use this result everywhere to design your strategies of biodiversity management or anything. But I think what is important to keep in other projects and transdisciplinary projects is don't focus on a pest species or don't focus on an emblematic species. What's important is the host community, like all the small mammals. You have the shrews that are important, you have the wood mice that are important, not only the rats or not only the squirrels. Also, do not focus on a particular pathogens, because if you design a strategy for a pathogen, there will be consequences for other pathogens and it's quite unpredictable. So really take all the communities all together to monitor, survey or design your strategy. And maybe beyond this framework, also the modeling results are more transposable, because with these epidemiological models, you can maybe change some parameters and then it will fit to another situation, but you have the model that is there and ready to be applied to your particular case.
Many thanks, it was very clear. So now a question for Herwig. How has your project supported authorities in managing health risk from zoonotic disease?
Yes. Well, it's a tough question, because there's always the question how a single project would influence authorities. I think it will take many projects that all try to give the same message all the time. But where I think it makes a difference is because you first of all you start informing people. You start informing people about these risks. If you talk about health authorities, they are, of course, concerned with what happens after an emergence of an infectious disease has happened. And then they try to somehow manage it. And they need for that, they need a good system of basic health care. They need a good system of communication, so that they have to have a system of samples that can be diagnosed and so on. But they are often not that much aware of the kind of conditions where such emergence can happen. And that is, or it's very anecdotal. It's said, oh, it's because a person ate a monkey or so, and that's how it started. But what we are trying to do is to really find out what are the conditions where this can happen, what are the areas where this can happen. Can we think about, well, risk maps or a kind of risk condition list? And that is what we are still working on. But the fact that we can talk to health authorities about such risks existing and being able to describe these risks, that already makes them think. And that makes them think at different levels. And that is quite interesting if you talk to people at the local community, who of course know the area. For them, this link between their health and the environment, so it's not always clear, but it's very acceptable. When you talk to officials that are in the capital and you talk about biodiversity to health authorities, and they say, oh, but that's for the other ministry. As just trying to make people see that there are these linkages at these higher administrative levels, that's quite important. And I think that's where projects like ours can contribute.
Thank you very much. I have another question for you. How can your outcomes be useful for nature conservation?
Yes. Well, nature conservation is often trying also, or is confronted with kind of simplistic ideas. It's very much like what I think it was Carl from DiMoC who said that earlier. People like simple messages, but the environment is not simple, and ecology is not simple. And I think we can help nature conservation by trying to make clear exactly what kind of mechanisms there are that are at play here, how complicated these mechanisms are, that something like a dilution effect may be there for some infections, and that's also related to what Nathalie, for example, showed, that tick-borne diseases, they have a completely different ecology than airborne infections, and that if you talk about the effects of biodiversity, they will be very different for these different kinds of diseases. They will also be very different for the kind of hosts that you talk about, and what I showed about the bats and the terrestrial small mammals, they react in a very different way to changes in the environment. Biodiversity changes there in a whole different setting. And I think that kind of information, trying to include that when you talk about nature conservation, that is important. Also trying to keep this in the back of your head, that when you say we want to protect biodiversity or increase biodiversity, and one of the arguments for that is like the dilution effect, like we often hear that is being used, that is not so certain, that if you go from very, very poor biodiverse community to a richer one, you may first have an amplification effect before you start reaching the benefits of a dilution effect. And so trying to transfer that kind of insights also in the minds of people who are involved in nature conservation, I think that is quite valuable. And actually this helped us also. We have some follow-up projects that are now focusing not so much on describing these mechanisms of the relation between biodiversity and infectious diseases, but what happens when you try to restore? Do you get simply the opposite mechanisms of what happens when biodiversity is degrading, or do you get completely other kind of mechanisms that are at play when you talk about restoration? And so to include that also in the thinking about nature conservation, that is important. But of course also at just the very simple fact that when you that people sometimes have the idea, there is a bat that is the reservoir for some kind of disease, so we have to simply kill the bats and then kill all the bats. Well, just by showing what the diversity is of the bats, and that not all the bats are carrying this kind of infection, that also helps in nature conservation. But that's of course something flat for which you don't need a project, because we as biologists we know that, but trying to convince other people about that needs additional data.
Many thanks, Herwig. Now I'm going to open the questions to the audience. So do you have questions for Nathalie and Herwig? Yes, Karin?
Well, it's for Nathalie first. So I would like to know whether you are informed about the diversity of maybe other rodent-borne viruses like Hunter and Pumala. And so there's such a diversity also of viruses which can be pathogens for humans as well, where maybe not much is known how much they would be distributed within urban regions across the diversity of rodents.
Yeah, so in this project, it's true that for viruses, we focused on 4 families of viruses, and now we are going to the metagenomic approach. And or the detection of flaviviruses, for example. So we are struggling with technological problem, but for example, for rats in the urban parks of Lyon city, we were surprised not to find so many other viruses. So, well, we still have, we will look for hepatitis E, sorry. But yes, in the metagenomic data, we don't have so many viruses. So we will try to confirm that, and yes, enlarge as much as we can the detection of what is circulating, and pathogens that are, well, microorganisms that are pathogens for humans, but also for rodents, because if the health of rodents is affected, that it can also have consequences on other zoonotic agents.
And Nathalie, maybe you can also say something about the coronaviruses that we studied in.
Yeah.
Because we had, in both projects, we were actually collaborating. We had this kind of corona extension, as was mentioned in the beginning also, which was funded by the European Commission, to include in the kind of work that we are doing a larger focus on coronaviruses. And of course, we did that in Africa, but also in Europe. Nathalie can maybe say something.
Yeah, in Europe, so first we tried to find the SARS-CoV-2 virus, and we didn't find it in the rodents. And okay, and then we look at the diversity of the coronaviruses in these samples, and it's about 3% of the rodents that were positive. So we have the sequences and the diversity, and we found more coronaviruses in bats because we extended the sampling to bats for BiodivERsA. and we have, I think it's about 13% of bats that are positive for coronaviruses, and with alpha and beta coronaviruses.
Yeah, and these are coronaviruses. The same happened actually in Africa. And there we also had a lot of paramyxoviruses. And both of these groups are viruses that are very, very variable and that can very rapidly change also. So these are the types of viruses where you expect that now and then spillover to other species happens, including humans, and where there is a certain risk that the virus adapts to that new host.
May I very, very shortly add a question to the coronaviruses and how you classify diversity? Because while slight differences in sequences don't necessarily mean a high diversity. So do you calculate like phase PD, so phylogenetic diversity, or how do you quantify diversity in coronaviruses? It doesn't matter whether it's in rodents or in bats, because we speak about diversity as we speak about species, and that does not really apply to viruses, obviously.
So yes, for the moment, the coronaviruses, they were not included in the analysis that we saw on the richness of pathogens because we didn't have the results at this time, and we have a too low prevalence to include them in the models. Like, we kept only the pathogens that had more than 5% of prevalence to have statistical power. But then for the analysis of coronaviruses in rodents and bats, there are other phylogenetic called classical analysis of mainly clustering and diversity with based on the genome, but we don't have a lot of full genome yet.
Many thanks. Sorry, we forgot to launch a video. So Sophie is going to launch a video presenting your two projects. So Sophie, could you please launch this video? Thank you so much.
Sure.
Thank you very much, Herwig and Nathalie.
Did you know that viruses, like coronaviruses, are naturally present in a wide diversity of animals? They naturally circulate in wildlife between individuals of the same species. But under certain conditions, they can even jump from one species to another. When wildlife is disturbed by environmental or human-induced factors, it can create conditions leading to the emergence of diseases in humans. This is where the One Health approach comes in. It recognizes the interconnection between human, animal, and environmental health. As the COVID-19 pandemic unfolded, BiodiV-AFREID and BioRodis began investigating coronaviruses in wildlife. The multidisciplinary teams studied their diversity in bats and rodents, in wild and in urban areas, looking for patterns of occurrences. They also investigated how changes in biodiversity and human disturbances affect the relationships between wildlife and their viruses. Working with local stakeholders, they collected ecological, biological data and samples from bats and rodents in Europe and Central Africa. In the lab, the researchers used molecular techniques to determine if animals carried these viruses and to identify their identity and genetic diversity. They found multiple coronaviruses, but the strain responsible for the COVID-19 pandemic, SARS-CoV-2, was not detected. They identified coronaviruses in African bats, including in migratory species and bats hunted by humans. They also found strains in European bats and rodents. Interestingly, urban rodents so far tested negative, while wild rodents and bats tested positive for coronaviruses. Despite the unknown risk of these strains, close and repeated contact with infected species may lead to their emergence in humans. BiodiV-AFREID and BioRodis shed new light on the diversity of coronaviruses, which species they are associated with, and their seasonality. Better understanding the circulation of these viruses can help us reduce the risks of emergence of new diseases while taking the necessary steps to protect humans, wildlife, and the planet.
So thank you very much, Sophie, for this video. Now this session is over, and the next one will be on fostering policy impact, where Biodiversity Plus will showcase how project findings have been shared to inform decision-making at various levels and connect with major European policies. And Miri will facilitate this session. Miri, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Julie.
Can you see my screen, Miri?
Yes. How can I control that presentation, or I should tell you just click?
Yes, only click. It should work. Please tell me.
Yes, thank you, Sophie. So hi. Talked a little bit today. I've been working on the policy brief of synthesizing all these great researches with Biodiversity. It was fascinating to read that, and also to learn more about the current policy landscape within Europe and internationally, to understand the relevance of these findings. Next. Thank you. Sophie, next, please. Oh, and more. You can have. As Magnus presented in the beginning, the policy briefs are the part where we take the knowledge supported by BiodiverSA and make it available to a wider audience, to policymakers, managers, and the public. So we have some findings that are very relevant to just the general public, the farmers, and many other stakeholders. So that was the primary goal, to feature and highlight the results, to provide information to support policy processes, again, within Europe and internationally, and provide policy and management recommendation to support both nature conservation, biodiversity conservation, and health. Next, please. Yeah, so this is kind of a summary of the work process, and we tried as much as possible in creating the policy briefs to integrate between the policymakers and the policy needs and the scientists. So we started with a clustering workshop, trying to talk with all the PIs and coordinators of all the projects and see how we take 10 projects and put it which are so rich, and put it into just 3 relatively short policy briefs. We searched again the landscape of current policies and for the most relevant policy processes going on for these findings, and then consolidating the findings, reading all the papers, meeting with the scientists to understand the science better and the relevance for policy, and of course, and then we presented it to policy advisory groups. So we had representatives from different NGOs, from the European Commission, and other relevant organizations to look at them first at the kind of the main results, the main highlighted results, and see what is relevant for them, and then later on to review the policy briefs as they were developed. And then, of course, there were many rounds of reviews, first of all by the scientists to confirm that the sciences were presented well, but then a very intensive round of review by the policy advisory group to see how well these policy briefs serve them. Next, please. So for the first challenge was to take these 10 extremely diverse and very rich projects with so many very, very important outcomes. And we heard today just the highlights and see how, again, we can consolidate it to briefs and what are the common themes. Click, please. So next. Thank you. So we decided to focus the policy briefs around 3 main themes. So first of all, you might have noticed that land use and landscape diversity and its impact on health and well-being was a common thread through almost all the projects. But we took the most relevant result to that. There is a policy brief on infectious diseases, talking about zoonotic diseases, about antimicrobial resistance, vector-borne diseases, emerging infectious diseases, and so on. And then another policy brief for the projects that are more relevant for agricultural system health and diversity and the impact on human diversity. So click please. Yeah. So we had projects around each theme, and few projects were common to a few of the policy briefs. So here each hexagon is a policy brief. Thank you, Sophie. Next. Yes. So the first policy briefs talked about landscape diversity and some of the findings from Dr. Forrest and other projects about air pollution, heat stress reduction, mental health benefits, and distribution of antimicrobial resistance. The second one, click. You can click through. Yeah. So some of the more infectious diseases theme on the second brief, and then the third brief on agricultural ecosystem health and health of pollinators and other insects, and also of soil in crops. Next, please. Yeah, one back, it kind of jumped. Yes. So kind of highlighting main findings and main recommendations in one slide, and all the briefs are online, so you're welcome to go look at them, and you're also welcome to email me and the team for more questions. So talking about landscape diversity, and really its importance to many health outcomes, it was striking to see how much of the management needs to be done on the landscape level, rather, and not necessarily or not only at the species level. Next. And yeah, well, we had a pretty good discussion now about zoonotic diseases and emerging diseases in the second brief. And then in this brief, there was a part on microbial diversity, and it was very interesting to see how microbial diversity is important through different systems in plants and in soil and in microbiome of wildlife to reduce pathogen infection, and also to prevent the spread of antimicrobial resistant genes. Yeah. Yeah, Sophie just put the link for the policy brief. Thank you, Sophie. And the last, the third policy brief was on biodiversity in agricultural systems. So, and focusing around functional diversity, as we heard earlier, and the importance to protect not only floral diversity, but to consider the nutritional value, to conserve wild bees, and to prevent pathogen spread, and the very interesting work on suppressive soils and its role to protect crop from pathogens and insects. So next. Yeah, so kind of if we have an overall view, the briefs look at different levels of diversity from a kind of a a different level on species, landscape, and functional diversity, and how crucial they are for our health, well-being, and basically our survival. For the very most fundamental parts of human health. As I said, it often takes a landscape level approach, and we really saw how collaboration of environmental scientists and ecologists with the health sectors, it is important and should be strengthened even more. And as very well done in Biodiversity and should be even more augmented is planning for policy and societal impact early on in the project can give excellent science with very high practical values and implementations. So next up, we went a little bit over time. So I just wanted to thank all the PIs and the coordinators. It was extreme pleasure. I was supported by the Swedish Environmental Protection Agency for this policy briefs, and of course all the team of BiodiVERSA, the communication team, the work package for policy. So thank you so much. And now we'll have a panel. I see already Klaus raising your hand. You wanted? Oh no. Okay. Yeah. So thank you, Sophie. Take the presentation. So we're really honored to have in the panel representatives, research representatives from each kind of team. We will have Daniela Luza. Are you here?
Yes. Hello, everyone.
Hello. Hi. So Daniela is a professor for public health in the Medical University of Vienna. She's a public health expert and a doctor, and also has a master's in environmental management. And she just published a book on forest therapy. She might mention later on. We have Nathalie Charbonnel, the coordinator of the BiodivERsA project. She's a senior scientist at INRA in France, and the research director of the Biology Center of Population Center for Population Management. And we have Klaus Birkhofer, the coordinator of the FUN project, and he's the head of the Department of Ecology in the Brandenburg University of Technology in Germany. So on the policy side, everybody's here. Sorry, I can't hear. So on the policy side, we're honored to have here Karin Zaunberger. We heard before from the European Commission for the DG Environment, and she's a focal point for the CBD Knowledge Center and also supporting IPES. And we have Christina Romanelli from, she's a program officer on biodiversity, climate change and health in the World Health Organization. Christina, are you with us?
I am.
Yes, wonderful. You made it. Thank you so much. And so those are the participants from the panel, and we should have in the audience later for questions, we should have David Guria Gardesa from the program officers for DG Sante, and he's coordinating the EU for Health and Health Research Program. So he will be available for questions later on. So thank you so very much. So first of all, I would like to address the question. Okay, great. David is with us as well. So I would like to address the question first to the researchers. So can you recap in a very short 2 minutes, what are the main contribution of biodiversity to particularly human health your project, and kind of looking at the different policy briefs. So the first one is on landscape diversity. So Daniela from Dr. Forest, can you speak a little bit about that?
Yes, thank you very much for the invitation to come here today online and talk about our project. You might have heard a lot about the Dr. Forest project already, but it has been a really successful project also in terms of dissemination and publications. And our findings emphasize the multifaceted contributions of forest diversity to human health, and we had these several work packages, and in a nutshell we found out that diverse forests are highly effective at attenuating heat stress, which is really important in in times of climate change, as you know. Particularly so the dense and multi-layered canopies that provide cooler microclimates. This was one major finding. It's all about the canopies and the forest, the type of trees in the forest. Then we found out that there is also a huge topic about air pollution and filtering effects, fine particulate matter filtering effects when it comes to tree species. So it's really important to think about which kind of tree you plant to have the most potent air pollution effects from a public health perspective. Also, we found out that the species diversities in forests reduce the infection rate of ticks, especially important for Borrelia bacteria and Lyme disease, which really is also a huge public health effect. Also, we found out that the visual and acoustic diversity of forests has profound effects on mental health. So we found evidence for this. Experiencing a rich diversity of sight and sounds and other senses in forests can reduce stress and reduce negative mood, and even foster feelings of awe and mental restoration. And as Miri already told you, all this work culminates in a book. I was invited to write about forest therapy. It's only published in German, but I know that a lot of German speaking people are here. If I may post the book title here, just in case you want to look it up. And I think this is also a really important outcome of an EU project, to have something also for the medical students or other health professionals to give away. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniela. Nathalie, can you speak a little bit more, kind of very summarizing very quickly, because we're just coming off a session on that, but the contribution of wildlife biodiversity and different types of diversity to mitigate zoonotic diseases, kind of maybe a recap or a new perspective to what we had just in this last session. Yes.
Yeah, so very quickly, we have seen with some empirical survey or modeling that in some cases, the biodiversity of small mammals could regulate the circulation of some zoonotic pathogens. So that is very important for public health and nature restoration or conservation. And we have also seen that it's not the number of species that can be important in wildlife, but more what species are there and what categories, in which categories they belong to. So are they urban dweller or forest species or generalist? This will highly influence the capacity of biodiversity to regulate these zoonotic pathogens. And so if you want complex communities in wildlife, maybe you need some complex landscape, and I think it's one of the common also results we have with other BiodiverSA project we've seen here. Like if you have not diverse forest in terms of trees and soil and etc., you will not have a complex community of small mammals, and so you will not regulate even if you increase the number of species in your rodent community.
Thank you so much, Nathalie. So now to Klaus. So we heard a great deal about the impact of biodiversity and functional diversity for functional agricultural systems. But if you can explain more clearly, what are the implications of a project for human health specifically? Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. So the synthesis project here really provides evidence that while, for example, current policies to manage agricultural landscapes in the EU, the current CAP, are really focusing on conservation of traditional diversity, taxonomic aspects of biodiversity. In FunProt, we showed that there might be an additional kind of set of goals that is more focusing on the functional diversity, certain functional properties of biotic communities. And I really mean plants, animals, microbes, whatever, that can then help to promote ecosystem services that will be beneficial for human health. And in an example, for example, when you would aim for high, well, I'm an arachnologist, I love spiders, so you have to hear something about spiders now. I know they are not as popular as bees, but you have to take it in now. So if you conserve and promote spiders in cereal fields in Sweden, this is really great for aphid control. Aphids are transmitting plant viruses, so that will lead to higher yields. We have shown this previously. But if, on the other hand, another important natural enemy group, ground beetles, which you have seen in my short, brief FunProt talk, are dominated, these ground beetle communities are dominated by large ground beetles, the positive effect of spiders will cease, because those large ground beetles eat my spiders. Hence, there's no more benefit of having the spiders. So this showing you clearly there's a taxonomic aspect of provision of ecosystem services, which always is mixed with the functional aspect of those communities. And when you then go into the health cascade that we showed in FunProt, what does that mean for the farmer? Having more spiders means higher yields. Yes, but having larger ground beetles means reducing these gains or even neglecting them completely. So that means having more aphids, right? And if you have more aphids, you have two choices. Either you accept it and you have lower yields and lower income, or you spray more pesticides, insecticides in that case, right? And there is your connection to health. But it's a very indirect connection. And what FunProt in our reviews, empirical, well, we didn't do empirical studies, but meta-analysis and synthesis did is really giving examples for these cascading links and also providing gaps that we need to address. We don't have a single study that follows this whole chain of arguments through with empirical data. And we worked with health and nutritional experts. We don't have these data sets. So what we did in a synthesis project is we pointed out the gaps in this full chain. Yeah.
Thank you so much. So we're honored to have Karin Zaunberger from the DG Environment. So Karin, can you please present a little bit more your work that is relevant to these results, and talk a little bit how the policy briefs and the results in general inform your work, or kind of what was surprising or specifically relevant to your personal work?
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. Now, for my direct work, this direct work in international negotiations. As I presented, the global action plan of biodiversity health has been adopted. Now it's really on implementation. Now, this policy briefs both, and they really come at a very good moment. I was quite impressed about how you managed to put really condensed knowledge into a few pages, and yet still thinking about my own colleagues and also myself, how short the span is for reading and stay concentrated on one thing. What would probably be really useful is, for example, the slides that have been shown to introduce the policy briefs. They also were a very nice pointer and a very nice teaser. I think people really, in particular in the policy arena, they work like this. And why is it extremely timely right now? You've probably heard that the incoming European Commission, now there is a vision, it's preparing a vision on agriculture and food. This is one of the things to be delivered by the European Commission in the first 100 days of this next incoming incoming colleagues. So, but I would really recommend to propagate these briefs also on the highest level. I mean, in these new incoming commissioners and cabinets, and perhaps also maybe through collaboration with partnership. There are partnerships on agriculture, but I mean, you have these policy briefs with this knowledge that I'm absolutely certain is not necessarily on the radar on these new incoming colleagues. So it's a very good moment, but it would need to be prepared. And what I said as an incoming teaser, what you had in your descriptive slide, this was already been good. And then if I may, another just really personal practical comment, reading the policy brief, actually the real very interesting part is at the very end, when the recommendations are a bit more detailed and you really have the entry places. So if this comes early, I know this is hard for the hard work the scientists have done, but knowing how policymakers really unfortunately work, that they rarely go into the details of the science. They might then after they first, this interests me, that's very good for my work, and then they dig deeper. It should be the other way around, but I've seen 9 out of 10 unfortunately work like that. So for me, as a biologist and all people with this type of formation, of course, you are naturally attracted, but most of these policy makers, they are lawyers, economists, they don't, I feel overwhelmed. It's that, so you really have to take the hand and lead them to the very important information. So to cut a long story short, in a way, for my direct work, it's really, it feeds my, it gives me more assertiveness in these negotiations I'm participating. And actually next will be the upcoming IPBES negotiations. I'm actually quite grateful. I will definitely put them in my pocket, because you need to have this, I have it on the spot. So I think this is, really useful in this regard. And I would expect this is in this, so it's for both on the international sphere, but even more so also on European level, but also on national level, I would expect. So, and of course, I aware that this needs yet another level of work, probably. It's not just the same brief that works very well. Maybe it's like almost like a different cover page in order to get the entry. Because something, the policy...
Oh, Karin, you were interrupted.
Yeah, I'm muted.
Yeah.
And the policy briefs, as they are shaped now, they come from the biodiversity community, but you have to make them attractive for these others. For example, really put forward what is in there for you. Now, coming back to this vision on agriculture and food, I think, working towards sustainable food systems, I really hope that this is an overarching game and goal. And also, we have seen a lot of fights, controversy between agriculture farmers on the one hand side, and all these discussions on the nature restoration law, etc., where so much misinformation also entered the political discourse. It was almost breathtaking. Now, fortunately, the nature restoration regulation, as it says, has been adopted, but now I think for its implementation, we really need to join forces. And more importantly, maybe here I'm completely dreaming, but there will be a new common agricultural policy, and really we hope that this one, it sounds almost impossible, but this is what we need. It really has to lead to this sustainable, healthy agriculture, where agriculture, all these sectors work together in a nexus approach. And the upcoming assessment will truly focus on that how important it is if you want to achieve results.
Thank you, Karin. Thank you so much for this very interesting perspectives. Christina, thank you so much for bearing with us through the night. We're going to be patient with you. You can have to speak slower or after not sleeping. So thank you so much for joining us. Christina has been instrumental in the negotiations between the World Health Organization and CBD on this nexus on biodiversity and health. And I would really like to hear a little bit more. So Karin did a very good job presenting the newly adopted a plan on biodiversity and health in the last COP last month. But if you can present this agreement, and also kind of the same question, how the policy briefs and the results of these research that we heard today inform newly your work. So you have to be unmuted, please. Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Miri. And, just a big thanks to the whole BiodiVERSA Plus team, and huge congratulations. But also thank you, for giving WHO the opportunity to engage in this really critically important final dialogue. And I have to say, this has been incredibly inspiring work. So inspiring, in fact, that it has managed to keep me engaged throughout this all-nighter. I am, just to give you a little bit of background about me, I'm currently the Biodiversity, Climate, and One Health focal point at WHO, and also the Biodiversity, Indigenous, Traditional Knowledge Systems and Indigenous People focal point for the Global Center for Traditional Medicine, which was newly established 2 years ago at WHO. Prior to that, I led the CBD-WHO Joint Work Program on Biodiversity and Health since its establishment. So really, everything that was presented here today was like music to my ears. It's been, these are absolutely inspiring projects. And so I'm going to talk about, I'm going to try to address your questions in parts, and please bear with me if I start to lack coherence. I'm not lacking any enthusiasm in this space, I promise you. But at WHO, essentially our work at the intersection of biodiversity, climate, health includes everything from building partnerships to helping countries to understand the nexus, to building capacity and operationalizing the interlinkages between biodiversity and health, which sounds like it's easy to do, but really has been quite the challenge. And all of the projects that have been presented here and that have been beautifully summarized, by the way, in the policy briefs, summarize that emerging evidence at the nexus in a way that's really foundational to the work that ECH, the Environment, Climate, and Health Department at the WHO, carries out. And I think it really also helps us to develop actionable evidence-based recommendations on that basis. So I think it's worth noting that the efforts that are made to bridge the science policy dimensions, to which Karin has also just addressed. It's not about the science alone. The science is critically important, but then also making that science translational is equally important. So the efforts made to bridge those science policy dimensions are what really help us at WHO to translate that into practical guidance, to better understand and address the environmental determinants of health, and then support their integration in national health policies, plans, and programs. What would be tremendously helpful would be ensuring that we also have the mandate to do so. So it's wonderful that we've got this in the biodiversity spaces, that a lot of this is biodiversity led. The Global Plan of Action on Biodiversity and Health is an important step, crucially important step forward. It's been 6 years in the making. There are 3 robust decisions that stand behind it. But that doesn't necessarily permeate in the policy space of the World Health Organization. So one of the things that would be tremendously useful would be to ensure that the messages are not only tailored to be appealing to the to the biodiversity and conservation communities, but also tailored to appeal to a health policy-making audience. And it is not an easy task, precisely because the health community isn't necessarily driven toward a preventive approach. And I think part of the immense value of the work and all of the projects that are presented here are precisely to show or precisely to make that argument for primary prevention, for prevention source, addressing those health risks or potential health risks at their source, and embedding biodiversity as a core driver of health resilience in public and global health systems globally. So what does that mean? It's not just about perceiving biodiversity and its loss in terms of the potential risks it poses to human health, but also showing us how, or showing the health community at large, how biodiversity can be harnessed to create health promoting environments. And I mean, one thing that needs to be said is that we have to understand that globally the stakes are really clear. We know that over 3/4 of emerging infectious diseases are zoonotic and arise from wildlife, domesticated animals, and their interactions with people, thanks to the activities of people. We also know that vector-borne diseases, malaria, dengue, and the whole host of them account for 17% of all infectious diseases globally, that really highlight the immense health burden that's tied to ecological changes, including all levels of biodiversity. If you add to that the health crises that stem from, for instance, poor air quality, which cause 7 to 8 million annual deaths, and unhealthy diets, which create 11 million premature deaths annually. And I think that it becomes evident that the components of biodiversity examined throughout each of these projects are not just environmental issues. They are foundational global health priorities, but policymakers need to understand them as such. So why are the policy briefs important? For all of the elements I just described, but also because what Karin said, this work also comes at a really pivotal moment as we continue to recover from COVID-19 and prepare for the, I would have to say, inevitable next epidemic and pandemic that will ensue unless we dramatically change the way we do things. The projects provide a much needed bridge between innovation and essential research and actionable policy. Sorry, was that too long?
No, it was wonderful. Thank you, Christina. Thank you so much. Thank you both. There's a comment here. We need more Karins with your wide words and definitely more Christina's for these understandings and insights, specifically in the agricultural and the health community. I actually have more questions I would like to ask the panel, but I would really like to open the floor for the audience to ask this great integrative panel questions about policy and implementation and the societal impact of the research we heard today. And just to remind you, we have also David Goria here from DG Santé, if we want to address some questions on the spot, unprepared on the spot questions. So yeah, please, if you have, if there are any questions in the audience, please put it in the Q&A box.
I don't see any questions yet in the Q&A.
Okay.
And you can move on if you want.
Yes, okay. So maybe I will follow up with a question. We heard a little bit about the implementation and current policies, and one of the, I think, big achievements of this past year in terms of conservation was the nature restoration law in Europe. And one of the questions I got from the reviewers from the Commission was, what are the actual supporting evidence, the new supporting evidence you have in the research? So this question is to Nathalie and Daniela primarily. What are the new supporting evidence you have for the actions promoted by the nature restoration law? And then are there any actions or specific kind of fine-tunings that are missing in the law that you would like to recommend from your research? We don't have a lot of time, so please be short. Daniela, in your address.
Yeah, thanks for this question. So even though I have to be short, it's interesting for most of you that this has been a huge issue in Austria, because Leonore Gewessler, the Austrian climate minister from the Green Party, was nearly sued by the Austrian party, People's Party, for her vote in favor of this particular law. So it was really explosive in our country. And the Austrian People's Party is center-right policy party and claimed that her actions were unconstitutional, which were not, of course. And this dispute highlights the political tension surrounding climate legislation and its implementation, not only in Austria, but in the whole European Union, and worldwide. So this was really, might be interesting for you who are not from Austria to highlight. So for me, I'm a medical doctor. So prevention is what we do. I'm a public health expert, and we can use nature for primary, secondary, tertiary, quaternary prevention. So this is what we are trained for. And so when it comes to this specific law, I think that nature conservation, which we had beforehand as a topic, would be more important than restoring it. So the law is something good. It's really exciting. It's a milestone for biodiversity in Europe. Of course it is. But it would have been better to go for conservation in the first hand. So from a public health perspective. Our research in this project, in the Dr. Forest project, underscores the importance of forest diversity in fulfilling the goals of this restoration law. Just two examples. In Article 8 for urban ecosystems, it says that planting diverse species is crucial to create dense canopies that reduces heat stress and air pollution in cities. So it's the urban ecosystem. And for forest ecosystems, this is part of Article 12, the structural diversity and species variation would be good to think for if you would like to maximize forest health benefits, including disease prevention and mental health being. What would be an additional action? So one area that the law could expand on is explicitly including health consideration into its framework. So, for example, that landscape planning should include tree species chosen specifically for their unique health benefits when it comes to allergen reduction, microclimate regulation, and mental restoration. So there is, I think, something more to add on here.
Thank you, Daniela. And the same question to Nathalie.
Yes, so if we take the example of cities, increasing urban green spaces is very important, well, for mitigating the rise of temperature or mental health, etc. And in the BiodivERsA project, we show that it can dilute the circulation of an important hantavirus that causes some hemorrhagic fever syndrome in humans. Well, this is important. Another important thing in the natural restoration law is the importance of monitoring and collecting data. And in France, what we learned from the focus group with the stakeholders is that the small mammals, in France, they are not in the French law. They have no regulatory status. And so there is almost no data, or nobody cares about the yellow-necked mouse or the bengal, etc. So really putting some effort in restoration and monitoring will help knowing in which condition restoration can mitigate the zoonotic risk. And one thing that is missing that we also show during the focus group with the stakeholders is that it's very difficult when you are ecologist to have people from the public health being really engaged, because they have other main problems with public health, and rodent-borne zoonotic diseases are not so important. And so it's really a problem, because when we have data on zoonotic diseases, we publish it in academic papers. And so it's often some journalists from the global media that report these results, and the general practitioners, they see it from this pathway, so they are not very happy to be aware of this before. Or sometimes they have a really good capacity to diagnose and cure diseases, but they don't know things about the exposure. So, well, what I want to say is that really need to succeed in collaborating, like the vets and the general practitioners and the ecologists, the health ecologists, so that all the data, all the results, all the information is shared. This can be done at a local scale, but not at a national scale. So for larger scale, I think having like a platform where we can share data on our results, that the human cases, the strange symptoms, the pathogens discovered in the rodents or wildlife, and we all have one place where we can share these results and cross the results. I think it's really important. Otherwise, like Karin and Christina said, the science will not translate into policy or health management impacts. Thank you.
Thank you, Nathalie, so much. There is actually a short but very, very important question from Charity Kunana. She asked, what is the policy implication of no action? This is, this is a big, but maybe Christina and Karin, if you can really, we have no time actually, but just one sentence to answer this really big question.
With pleasure. No action,
Yeah.
it will just get terribly worse. So inaction is actually the worst. Honestly, that's kind of, I think, if you look at all these scientific findings in several assessments, IPCC, etc., no action is just, it will get worse. The problem is that many people think they can hold on a status quo. And the thing is, if you don't do anything, I mean, you will just be overrun by really many negative impacts. But this must be made clear without creating a panic. But definitely no action is the worst. Of course, bad action is even bad, if it's even worse, but no action is no solution.
Christina, you would like to comment?
We have proof of what no action does. Where is the proof? The proof is that 1 in every 4 premature deaths is attributable to preventable environmental factors. Therefore, 1 in every 4 deaths could be avoided with action. So I think that is concretely, and it's not just about the action, it's about what type of action we're taking. Because one of the interesting things that one of the other panelists or speakers, researchers had said was, I'm a medical doctor and prevention is what we do. Unfortunately, that's not what health systems do globally, and that's not what investments do globally either. Less than 3% of all global health expenditures are actually on prevention, whereas 97% are actually on response. So it's about curing symptoms rather than preventing them. So That's what action means, working on that prevention and investing in it.
Yeah, thank you. Nathalie actually put a link to a very good paper of the cost and benefits of primary prevention of zoonotic pandemics. So thank you, Nathalie. It's here in the chat box. We actually have no time left. We're over time. So please go to read the briefs, and we kind of open the floor in the name of all the panelists to contact us with any further questions. Unfortunately, we have to finish. But thank you so much for all of you for participating. Yes.
Okay, great. It was really great. Thanks a lot for all these inputs. I think we should move to the concluding words at the end of the meeting. So I will let Julie and Magnus say it. But thanks a lot to all speakers, panelists, to you, Miri, for this great work on the policy briefs. So thanks all for your attendance in this meeting. So final words for what is next with Julie. I will share my screen.
Thank you, Sophie. Thank you, Sophie. So yes, we will continue to share these briefs, this information, these outputs. Next week, we will organize a press conference 11 days before the eBest Nexus report, and we hope that it will, all these outcomes will feed journalists and influencers. We are organizing this press conference here in Brussels. Of course, we will involve all Biodiversity Plus partners and stakeholders. We will provide them communication toolkits with key messages. We will follow the recommendation of Karin, and we will target key stakeholders in order, yes, to send them the brief. And with the communication team in Biodiversity Plus, we will also launch a big social media campaign based on the key messages of the policy brief. So we will continue to push these messages in December and beyond. Thank you very much.
And so I guess I have the very last words. Thank you very much. Time flies. This was 4 hours, and it feels like we should continue much more. But we end for now, and hope we can continue this dialogues in different ways going forward. Thank you so much. It's really been a privilege just to be able to sit and absorb so much knowledge and really interesting thoughts about this whole topic of health and biodiversity. And we can see that although we have lots of information, lots of knowledge, the devil is still in the details. Every situation is different, and the results are not clear cut in terms of there is no one single answer to what is good and what should be done. We really must understand the details of the interactions and the ecosystems that we look at, and which health aspects we are looking at also, because there are many trade-offs to take into account. So we need to prioritize also what we want to achieve. But I think overall we have seen that diversity in the genetics, in species compositions, in functions, and in the structures of nature is important and benefits health when we have a richness. So, but it's clear we need more research, we need more dialogue between researchers and policymakers and decision makers in society. So, to be continued, but for now, thank you so much and goodbye.